We'd like to thank all of our patrons for making this episode possible, especially our elite patrons, Chris Williams, Heather Sachs, Joe from Real Spoilers, Pete from Middle Class Film Class, and Nerdrovert. Join these fine folks at patreon.com/binge movies. This is going to be a first in the history of the show after hundreds, over 100 episodes of ranking episodes and, I don't know, multiple co-hosts and global pandemic and a couple wars, maybe a third world war. Here we are. This is the first because we've done directors, we've done actors, we've done actresses, we've done movies in general, but we've never, that I remember, and somebody out there will probably correct me, specifically focused on somebody who was not a director or an actor, somebody who just did the special effects. And to say just did the special effects does this particular guy a great disservice. Of course, I'm talking about the legendary Ray Harryhausen, but I'm not here by myself, dear listener. You don't have to worry. I'm not going to ramble on by myself for hours and hours about old-timey movies. I'm here with a very special guest who comes highly recommended from the good folks over in the St. Louis area. One of the great podcasts out there, Real Spoilers. I'm joined by Matt, who came with so much acclaim, it's going to be damn near impossible for him to live up to the hype. Matt, the pressure is on. Welcome to Binge Movies.
We shouldn't have set the bar that high. Thanks for having me on, Jason. I really do appreciate it. This is a subject I'd love to talk about.
Well, I'm glad because I'm going to be honest with you, other than by reputation and of course seeing some of these movies on basic cable growing up, I knew nothing about Ray Harryhausen, and I had not seen, or at least had not seen, some of these movies in decades at this point. And it's really interesting because one of these movies I have a very quasi special connection to, even though I wasn't overly familiar with it. We'll get to it when we get there. So what is it about Ray Harryhausen films, or Ray Harryhausen, the man, the special effects guru? And we'll get into it when we get into the movies more specifically. But what is it specifically, personally for you that made you want to do this episode and had Kevin, our bracket from Real Spoilers, go, there's one guy in the cosmos who is ready for this entry, and it's not Tom O'Keefe, it is Matt. Matt, what's the answer to that question? Why are you here?
Well, I will say it's going to come down to you really got to lean into an old guy for stuff like this. When I was a kid, this was before cable, this is before VCRs, stuff like that. You're just at the mercy of what gets shown on regular television. And growing up in the St. Louis area, there was a local channel, Channel 11, that on Saturday afternoons, you were almost guaranteed every week to some kind of monster movie. Usually it was a Godzilla movie or it was a Ray Harryhausen movie. You would almost guarantee that every week you would see a different one. So that's just nostalgia of my youth, and that was something that really captured my imagination at the time. And so I think it's a lot of this has to do with, my interest in, mythology, or my interest in monsters or something like that. When you're a little kid, that really, really grabbed my attention. So when you, it was,
when you were a little kid, the epicness of these movies, there many of them that we're going to talk about. We're not going to talk about every movie he ever did. We're going to focus on 5, which includes Mighty Joe Young, It Came From Beneath the Sea, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Jason the Argonauts, and Clash of the Titans. What's interesting is we say Ray Harryhausen movies. He did not direct these films, but he may be the only special effects person in the history of film who, when you think about movies he worked on, you think about him almost as an above the title figure, though he wasn't. Like everybody of a certain generation, we know Stan Winston, and we know Dennis Muren, and we know Richard Edlund, and all these sort of people. We know them, we know their names, and you can kind of tell the movies that they worked on, but we don't say, oh, that's a Stan Winston movie, or oh, that's a Richard Edlund movie, as if they directed it or wrote it or the creative mind behind it. I think, well, as we get into it with the movies, I think it's fair to say that it's because of almost every movie he worked on, especially the 5 that we're going to talk about. It's his work that kind of makes these movies timeless. You agree?
That's correct. That's the selling point of the movie. I mean, and that's the reason why when these get shown on Turner Classic Movies or when they get put out on DVD sets, it's always the Ray Harryhausen collection, not director, not star. Because a lot of these don't carry over the same director or star anyway. Even just say, for example, the Sinbad movies. There's 3 of them, and every one it's a different actor, different group. You know what I mean? There's no continuity. The only continuity is the special effects. That's it.
It's so interesting because he has this like unique place. And again, we've never done anything like this at the show. We're doing it because one of our elite patrons, that's our top tier over on Patreon, patreon.com/binge movies. One of our elite patrons, who is also a listener of Real Spoilers and is a part of the League of Show Sharers over there, Heather Sachs, was like, hey, I'm sure you've heard her name 10 million times. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Heather was like, do Ray Harryhausen, do these 5 films. So she picked the movies. She picked Harryhausen. Here we are. It's all worked out to be kismet because
that's great. Well, I hope I do Heather proud with
this. Now the pressure's really on because
it is really on because she might look and goes, what the hell is this guy talking about?
Because you and Heather
run in
the same circles. Yeah,
right,
so
exactly.
She's going to come after you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're part of the Real Spoiler cinematic universe. And so is she, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly. That's right.
Well, let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it because I think we're going to have a lot to talk about that more so than the movies themselves, kind of philosophically, which I think is going to be an interesting conversation. Right. I'm going to lean a little bit on you because this is, I'm kind of a newbie when it comes to some of these movies. So I'm going to lean on you. And Heather, if this sponsored episode is the worst thing you've ever listened to, then don't blame me. Do not blame Matt. No. Don't blame Matt.
Oh.
Matt has been gracious with his time, and any guest of Binge Movies, I give nothing but praise to because it's a lot to ask. Hey, watch these 5 movies and talk about them for hours. That's a lot. Blame Kevin R. Brackett. All right, without much further ado, I'm looking at my watch. I think it's about that time. I think we should get to our rankings. Let's start with 1949's Mighty Joe Young, which currently has a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Here's the kind of movie you're waiting to see as John Ford and Miriam C. Cooper present Mighty Joe Young, whose sensational exploits will startle you, thrill you, electrify you with hair-raising excitement and suspense. See Mighty Joe Young as he savagely resists capture in his native Africa.
Oh! Joe!
See the most fantastic relationship between beast and beauty, a mere girl mastering a primitive giant. See Mighty Joe Young, enraged by Hollywood pranksters, destroy Filmland's swankiest nightclub on the fabulous Sunset Strip.
Mighty Joe Young,
the picture that's alive with the most sensational action thrills ever filmed.
Mightier than King Kong, Mighty Joe Young.
Mighty Joe Young was directed by Ernest Day Shootasuck. We're going to butcher a bunch of names here, folks, because...
Oh, sure, absolutely.
It was written by Ruth Rose. It's a story by Maria C. Cooper. It was released July 27th, 1949. On a budget of $1.8 million, it made $1.95 million, so not a hit. King Kong's better-looking cousin gets the beauty and a better career. This is the same creative team and a lot of the same actors that was in King Kong, that were in King Kong.
That's correct.
King Kong comes out in 33. This movie comes out in 49. It is almost in some way, I think the best way to categorize this is like a kind of upbeat, soft reboot of King Kong.
Yeah. It's also, when it comes down to it, it's not a monster
No, it isn't.
movie.
Not at all.
No, it's just an oversized gorilla. There's no dinosaurs. There's no weird creatures. There's no fantastic island full of beasts. It's just an orphaned gorilla raised on a ranch in Africa and just oversized. And then here's where we get to the King Kong comparisons. It's you've got the guy that owns the nightclub that needs a hook, and he brings the girl and the ape back to, and here we go. So
the other difference too is the girl and the ape, the relationship is almost more like siblings in a way. Like the love.
That's right. Yeah, she helped raise. Yeah, they grew up together.
There
she
was
was
love
a kid
between them, obviously, but they're more like
Right,
siblings
right.
than rather than like, this quote unquote monster's in love with this woman or whatever.
Right, exactly.
This definitely so
But he's still protective of her.
yes, very much so.
Yeah.
So on this film, Ray Harryhausen is not the lead special effects guy for the stop motion. He is credited as the first technician, but it's a lot of his techniques that he would go on in later films. This is the one that kind of gets him the look. This is the one
That's
where people start to recognize, okay, this guy has a unique skill, because obviously stop motion existed before Ray Harryhausen.
Right. Actually, the lead animator on this was Willis O'Brien, who did King Kong and Son of Kong, and any other stop motion that may have happened around that time. And obviously, he was top of the heap at the time.
Yes.
And Harryhausen was basically he mentored Harryhausen and got him on this movie, and then he just took the reins and ran with it.
Yeah, basically, yeah, and it's really hard to think about now because the way we do special effects now, it's obviously mostly digital, especially effects of this scope, right? We're not building giant models anymore. We're certainly not doing stop motion. We are if you're going to do an oversized ape or something, or a monster or something mythical or a mythical land or anything like that, you're not going to be using miniatures. Typically, you're going to be using CGI, digital effects. And there's all these different digital effects firms that do the work. And then those firms have tens of thousands of people that work on a movie in China or elsewhere.
Oh, goodness,
right?
yes. Yeah.
And this was not the case back then. The case back then was you had a relatively small team of people who were given a budget. Most of this was done most special effects were done wire, string, miniature, and stop motion. And if we're being honest, most of the special effects were terrible in these movies. But the folks who worked on King Kong and the folks who worked in Mighty Joe Young, including now Ray Harryhausen coming on for Mighty Joe Young, were the cutting, bleeding edge of special effects in the 1930s and 40s and into the 60s. Basically, they were at the cutting edge to where it seems arcane now, maybe a little honky tonk if we're looking at it now, some of these effects. But honestly, I think of all the movies that are on our list, I think some of the effects in Mighty Joe Young are some of the best.
Yes, very good. And it's of all these, I think there's only two on this list that are in black and white, and I think you can hide a lot of things in black and white you can't in color. So I think it's very believable. And there's not a lot of situations in that movie that are really fantastic. If he's having a fight with lions or he's, climbing a burning building or something like that, it's not out of the realm of possibility that you would see in real life. So it's not like King Kong climbing a skyscraper or, fighting a dinosaur.
Well, the thing that I was amazed with this movie was the fluidity of his body movement. And the complexity of how they integrate him into the movie, because Joe is entirely stop motion and they are using miniatures or using rear screen projection, using like miniature rear screen projection, because they're taking film, they're shooting real backgrounds, they're using those background plates, but they're shrinking them down to scale to Joe, because Joe's obviously a miniature, stop motion puppet basically. And so you have real footage that's miniature projected behind him to his scale, and then real people composited into the shot, either through forced perspective or through very rudimentary early compositing. And then the only place where it gets a little wonky is sometimes when it switches from, and this is true in all of his films, where it switches from the person, being an actual person in a composited shot, to then becoming the person stop motion. because then
where all of a sudden it's a clay puppet in the hand.
Yeah. Right. It's a clay puppet in the hand.
Right.
But even worse than it being a clay puppet, which is pretty obvious, the clay puppet is like half the size of Joe. So the scale's all off.
Yes.
But the one thing that I noticed in Mighty Joe Young in particular is the way that he moves, Joe, the way that Joe moves and the way that he moves around. It's like, I've seen movies and stop motion, and I would say between King Kong and this film, these two films, and he didn't work on Kong, but he did work on this one. The visual language that's used to this day for special effects shots and special effects creatures was more or less created in those two films.
I would agree.
And even the way that computers do the tracking and the way that we do digital creatures now, it's really hard to think about, but it's like, it's not just a matter of the technique of being able to get these things on camera. Somebody had to think about, especially with stop motion, the movement of these creatures and how does that play on camera and how do we insert them into, it's not just a matter of being able to do it. It's a matter of they had to actually invent the visual filmmaking language to integrate these effects into the film, because it hadn't been done like this before, especially before something like a King Kong, not to that scale, not to that effect. And then following up with this film, Mighty Joe Young. So it's like the seeds of what you see today in a average Avengers movie or a Spider-Man movie where Spider-Man's entirely a digital character. They can trace the roots all the way back to the work of Harryhausen and his predecessors, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot of, happy accidents that happen in these movies. I don't know if you ever noticed on King Kong and Mighty Joe Young, there's actual real fur on these puppets. Yeah. So when they're moving these, if they move them 1 second at a time, that fur gets moved. And so just again, it's a happy accident. It kind of looks like it's moving in the breeze, kind of like it's what it is it's fingerprints moving it around when they're moving the puppet around. But it actually adds, oddly enough, a slight layer of realism to it.
A couple of notes about this movie. So what's hilarious is where does Mighty Joe Young come from? And the movie just says Africa. And this always blows my mind, because to this day, white folks love to call the entire continent of multiple sovereign nations Africa.
Right. Yeah. In the old movies, it's basically Tarzan Africa. It's not there's not a lot of nuance. It's
nobody's saying Tanzania, nobody's specifying Nigeria, nobody's specifying this is happening in Ghana, this is happening in Senegal, this is it's just Africa. And when you hear people to this day,
it's a huge continent.
When you hear people to this day outside of movies, you're talking about as if it's this one monolithic nation instead of a giant continent full of separate nations with their own culture, own language, multiple languages, multiple dialects per country, multiple histories. Like it's a very ignorant Western kind of perspective. So that I was just
and I'm sure in the 1940s to an American, when you refer to Africa, it's very exotic. You just say Africa and they just think of that. They would also say the Orient when they're talking about the Asian country. You know what I mean? Yeah. They would just say this blanket term that doesn't mean anything. And all of a sudden it invokes this sense of, wow, what kind of weird exotic culture is this, without doing the homework and finding out it's not much different than yours.
The Orient was basically Asia. Africa was everything else. Then the Amazon was South America.
Sure.
And that was it, right? It was like, but the thing is, if you said to the average American, the average person in the United States of America, and you just referred to the United States as North America, or you referred to the individual states of just as being, America. Well, you live in America. You'd be like, well, I live in Missouri. You live in America. It's all the same.
Right.
We would be so offended at that. Like, oh no, I have my own culture. I'm a proud Missourian.
Exactly.
And it's like,
exactly.
we don't.
And then it's even more subset than that. You know what I mean? You would like when you say America, that means Canada, that means Mexico, that means the U.S. You know, and if you're from Rhode Island, you don't want to say, "Well, I'm not from
Correct.
Vancouver."
It's right. It's right. But we have no problem lumping entire completely
entire one thing.
Now that's kind of it's like a slight knock. You're right. It's a product of the time. It's unfortunately still something that hangs with us to this day. But one of the things that I noted is that Terry Moore plays the young Jill Young, no pun intended, and she's a little girl that kind of buys / adopts Joe.
Yes.
And most we have a very checkered history here in Binge Movies with kid actors. We don't tend to like them. But she's really good and really cute and really pitch perfect for this movie. And that's kind of the big difference again between this and Kong, where Joe is not being presented as this scary monster. Even like the biggest showpiece almost of the film is when he has the adult Jill on a platform in his hands over his head, and they're spinning almost like a music box, and she's playing the piano on the platform, like this big grand piano, and then he's on a platform and they're spinning around on the stage, and it's really her. They've composited her into the shot with the miniature Joe beneath her, and it looks really good. And that's like kind of, and it's like, okay, that is the complete tonal difference between this and King Kong. So this isn't just, I think going into this, the only Mighty Joe Young I'd ever saw was the 90s remake, which I remember being terrible. So in my mind, I always thought of the 49 version of this as kind of being a King Kong ripoff. I knew the overlap in creatives and it felt like kind of a cash grab of like, well, this was popular, 15 years ago.
I'm sure that's what the studios did back then. If something's making money, we're going to make another one. I don't know. Is it that different today?
No, it's not.
Yeah. I mean, it's studios see a formula, they stick to it. I find it, the one thing I find most interesting about that is the reuse of actors. So I'm sure you're going to get to this, but Robert Armstrong, who plays the nightclub owner, he's essentially playing his exact same character from King Kong and Son of Kong. So this is the third giant ape movie that he was in a row. I don't know if he told his, when they cast him, he's like, well, what have I got to do to get out of these monkey movies? You know what I mean? It's like, his agent figures, hey, we got a perfect role for you. You're going to be the
slimy nightclub owner for another monkey movie.
Yeah, exactly. But then you also have a heart of gold, and you change your mind, you kind of redeem yourself at the end,
yeah. He had an entire career as being just kind of a dickwad in giant monkey movies, giant ape movies.
Right.
I honestly, I was very, very charmed by this movie. I thought there's three really big set pieces in the film. We mentioned the one, which is the piano, kind of tiny dancer thing. There's the fire, which you talked about. Then there's the rodeo rampage where they're trying to capture him essentially, and it's and that's pretty impressive. That's where you get some of the he picks somebody up, they turn into a clay puppet. You also have like for a couple of frames. There's there's a reflection. I don't know if you noticed that, where there's basically like a pane of glass, and that's behind Joe, and it's basically just reflecting the scene back to itself. So that was probably something that was done in the optical compositing. It wasn't seamless, and so there's it's a little wonky in some places. Mm-hmm. But overall, for the era, for the time, for what they had to work with, the budget they had to work with, the time frame they had to work with, it's actually really impressive. And then you couple that with kind of like a more so sweet-natured, family-ish story. It's really kind of like a charming movie, and they introduce him as the difference between this and King Kong is even like when they introduce Kong in Kong, the original. They introduce him as this scary monster from the dark heart of the savage lands, King Kong, and not they introduce Joe as Mr. Joseph Young of
Yes,
Africa.
And
So the ape gets a formal name. He's not just Mighty Joe Young. He's not just Joe or Joe Young. He's Mr. Joseph Young of Africa.
And he's that on the credits
yes,
too. So,
yeah. He's almost nobility, you know. It's like Sir
right.
Joseph Young. I was thoroughly charmed with this. I'm a big wrestling fan, so a scene in this movie where when they're doing the nightclub act where there's all these strong men, and I noticed a couple of them by name, and so I Googled them and figured out who was in it because they're all old timey wrestlers. So there's
that's great. I did not know that.
Sammy Steen, Slamming Sammy Menaker or something like that, I think is his real name. There's Max the Iron Man, Bomber Henry Kilkey, Carl Killer Davis, Ivan Rasputin, otherwise known as Rasputin the Mad Russian. There's William Wee Willie Davis. There's Phil Olofsson, who is the Swedish Angel, who I know because of his very distinct face. He had a very particular disease that gave him that very distinct look. He wasn't even the original Swedish Angel. There's other Swedish Angels. He was like he basically stole that gimmick from somebody else. And if you know the Rocketeer,
Rondo Hatton.
Yeah, one of the main villains in the Rocketeer is partially based off of these guys who had that particular disease.
Rondo Hatton was the name of that actor from the 40s that they based. They did the prosthetics on the actor to make him look like that. Yep. But yes, I know exactly what you mean. A very distinct mug is what they have.
Yes, very much so.
And they almost always get cast as heavies because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Primo Carnero, who was had at one time the most knockouts. He may actually still have this record, the most knockout wins of anybody in the history of boxing.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So here's the thing. Here's what it comes down to, and this is going to sound lame. Joe is cute. Mighty Joe Young, Mr. Joseph Young of Africa. The puppet is cute, and the character is likable, and the story is pleasant. And of all the films that we watched this week, I loved this one the most. My only knock against against it is the adult Jill. About 80% of her dialogue is just her saying, Joe, no, Joe, 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 oh, Joe, run, Joe, no, Joe, hurry, Joe, Joe, where are you, Joe? And it's just, that got very taxing. If I had to hear Joe one more time, and if I heard Joe one time, I heard it 1,000 times. So,
I didn't know if you know this, but the actress who played the adult Jill, she was in the remake. They gave her a cameo. They actually gave Harryhausen a cameo too. There was like some kind of gala scene, and they were just patrons at the party.
Did all of her dialogue in the remake consist of her just?
I don't think she had one. I don't think she had one word to say.
So she went from having only one word to say, which was Joe.
They gave all the Joe lines to Charlize Theron on that one.
So she got.
Because I'm saying Joe now.
No, I'm the one that says Joe now.
Yeah.
I do the Joe.
You just sit there in the background. I'm yelling Joe.
So when you were a kid, was this one of the ones that was in heavy rotation? What's your history with
it? Yeah, it came up quite a bit. I mean, it was a great movie. I mean, I enjoyed it. It wasn't, again, when you're a little kid and you want monsters fighting monsters, and you want action. This isn't high on that list.
No,
what I mean. This is basically it's a movie about just an oversized animal. So he's. Bring him to the States. He's going to be a big star. He gets mistreated, then misunderstood, and now we've got to rescue him. And it's a really sweet story. You know what I mean? And when I was a kid, yes, I really loved all these movies. So it wasn't high on my list then. It's probably higher on my list now. So at one point, ranking all these, I probably would have put this last, but now I move it up a little higher. Well, just based on I'm just going strictly by nostalgia. Yeah. I'm going by what I got excited about when I was a kid, and I'm going to see giant monsters. I want to see giant monsters. This one doesn't really have giant monsters, but it's still a very good movie.
Well, there's a lot of giant monsters in the rest of these movies, and
oh, absolutely, yeah. There's giant monsters to spare.
But I don't know that there's as much of an engaging story and as engaging characters. Because what this movie did, and even critics at the time said this, is one of the critics at the time said, even though it's like very clear, they referred to Joe as a robot. I think somebody referred to, like, this is a review, contemporary review back in the 40s. And they referred to him as like, well, this robot. And, and I'm like, well, I wouldn't call it a robot, but okay. But I get what they're going for. And it was like, even though it's clearly mechanical and it never seems completely lifelike, the movie is successful basically because of the magic of the special effects of getting you to care about Joe as a character. And I found that to be true. I really cared about him and what happened to him and his plight. And I was happy that this movie has a good ending and a happy ending. And I was happy that the movie is more or less, kind of an upbeat movie. And so for that reason, it's obviously my best of this binge, surprising even myself. I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. I really, really like this movie. It's my number one. Now, you said that when you were a kid, this wouldn't rank too high for you. You're not a kid anymore, Matt. You're a grown-ass man. Some would say you're an old man. So in your old age,
I am an old man.
As an elderly man, have you gained wisdom, and where do you rank Joe now?
I have to say, you're kind of making me come around on this a bit. I had it ranked more around a 6.8, but I could be talked into that going up a little. You made a very good point. I judged a lot of these based off nostalgia. Back then I based it on what's the cool monster look like? Well, do I want to draw that cool monster? Do I want to, you know what I mean? Yeah. This I obviously didn't have that, but this one has a creature that you could care about. None of these other movies have that.
No.
All the rest of these are just monsters to be battled by the hero who also you don't care about.
I'm glad. I'm glad you said it, because you're going to notice a repeating theme throughout the rest of this episode.
Yeah, there's not a lot of actors here or characters that you care about. You're there for the spectacle, and that's about it. This one, you're correct. Out of all the ones on this list, this is the one that actually has a creature that you care about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You care about what happens to Joe. Whereas you can't say that almost about any of these others.
Which is kind of a miracle, because the movie's damn near 100 years old, and it's very clearly a stop motion puppet. And you're like, I care more about Joe than I care about most of the Avengers.
Very good point.
And like, that's not a small feat in a movie to get you to care about a character in general, let alone like you said, an oversized ape. Let alone an oversized ape who is very clearly not real.
Right.
But they do it because of the facial features and the movements, and if there is a modicum, even in 2022, of suspension of disbelief, and that is the expertise of the special effects crew.
I would say it must have been very interesting for a moviegoer in the late 40s to go in and see this. I mean, what do you have to compare it against other than
King Kong,
or or any other stop motion one that became it? I mean, this is, at that time, that's about the best you're going to get as far as special effects go. So I can see that being very believable. As I'm believing this as an actual gorilla.
I wonder if people were slightly disappointed, because obviously King Kong is this huge smash hit. This movie did not do well. And again, it's, 16 years later, 15, 16 years later. So maybe that moment had passed. Maybe this movie felt passe by 49 in story-wise in some regards. Like, we've been there, done that. Because obviously it didn't set the box office on fire like King Kong did.
No. But
I wonder if also there was a bit of disappointment because it isn't a monster movie. And King Kong really, it's not really a monster movie. That's kind of the moral of the story, right? Is they take this natural creature and they present him as a monster,
Right.
And so therefore, he kind of behaves like a monster or whatever. But in the end, we realized, well, the people were the monsters. He really wasn't the monster. The people were the
Right.
monsters.
They exploited him.
Yes.
They
Had they just left him alone on Skull
Right.
Island, he would
he would have been just
he would have been just fine. This is not the moral of this movie. I mean, there is mistreatment of Joe, but not by the family that raised him. Certainly not by Jill. Not by some of the other people in the movie who found him. He's more of like, hey, look, he's just like you said, he's just oversized gorilla, and they treat him more like a animal who's / member of the family. And I wonder if it was like kind of a doubt, like kind of a disappointment, because it's not a monster movie. It's kind of more of a family drama,
Yes. Yeah.
So I wonder if audiences were kind of turned off by that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it could be. Maybe they were saying, why isn't he fighting a giant snake? Why isn't he rampaging through the cities? Why is he only 15 feet tall instead of 30 feet tall?
I mean, the major set piece is a girl playing a piano and singing and him smiling. You do, like I said, you have the rodeo scene, which is kind of the biggest, like between that and a couple of the scenes like where he's like fighting the wrestlers or whatever.
The lions.
But that's
the wrestlers and the
that's played more almost for comedy though, right? Of like him like trying to knock out the ape, and he just kind of like touches him with his finger and then picks him up and throws him in the pool, and he's So I could see this being like, if you're thinking, hey, the people who brought you King Kong and Son of Kong, here comes the next great ape, right? Mighty Joe Young, and you go to the theater and you're like, what is this? Like, the special effects are good, but it's just kind of this happy, more or less happy story. I can see people being turned off by that, but
especially kids. If kids are used to going to a monster movie, they want to see a monster movie. And again, that goes to play how I felt seeing this in the late 70s. It's like, hey, I really enjoyed this movie. It's not King Kong. You know what I mean? I prefer to watch King Kong because I want to see him fight that T-Rex.
So what was your score? What was your rank before I cut you off?
On this, I had this at a 6.8.
6.8. You're going to keep it there?
Yep.
You're going to keep it there?
You know what? I think I might move it up. It's hard because I'm going to have my reasonings for the other ones, and they're not based on the merits of the acting or the story. They're based on how I took it from the skill involved in the special effects.
Right.
Since we're actually talking about a Harryhausen movie, I'm going to base it based on that, not based on the writers or the director's vision or
lack thereof.
actors. Or lack thereof. That's right. Yeah. These were just made to get kids in the seats and get monies. They weren't trying to win any awards with these.
Correct. So where does Mighty Joe Young rank for you then?
On this list right now, it ranks at number 4.
Wow, no, you're killing me.
Yeah. I know you. Well, and like I said, my reasonings for ranking these are going to be much different than yours. Yep. So you just have to take that with a grain of salt. And everything you said is a very good argument, and I could use those exact talking points you said to probably move this up pretty high on the list. Now, my number 1 will never move from my number 1, but I could see this moving up past maybe 3.
It better move. It better be higher than the next movie on our list, which is It Came from Beneath the Sea.
It's definitely higher than that one.
Which currently has a 56% on Rotten Tomatoes.
A tidal wave of terror engulfs the screen as a raging monster from the dawn of creation attacks the world of man.
Here, gentlemen, is your villain. It would take an enormous number of those to disable a Navy submarine.
Or just one of enormous size, Mr. Chase.
I see they picked an atom sub to go out and fight this thing. Why is that, Commander?
Could be because of the new electronic equipment, or her speed.
Was she ordered back here from Hawaii just for that?
That's right.
Think it's as bad as that, do you?
I think we're lucky she's here.
The H-bomb blasted it loose from the depths of the Pacific. But not even the H-bomb can kill it.
Unknown object coming this way. Entering minefield. Stand by, number 38, mine.
Fire!
Go up. Ready, number 12, south.
Fire!
Coming on through.
That's the end of our first line of defense, Miss Joyce.
Then the red alert.
West Coast reels under Holocaust as the men and weapons of the atomic age battle to the death against the ageless monster of the deep.
It Came From Beneath the Sea was directed by Robert Gordon. It was written by Hal Smith and George Worthington Yates. Worthing Yates, I'm sorry. It was released July 1955 on a budget of $150,000, and boy, does it show. It made $1.7 million.
Back then, that's a lot of money.
It is, but it's not 1 point something million that Mighty Joe Young had.
That's true.
A radioactive octopus gets desperate for food and turns towards eating man. Okay, I watched the colorized version of this.
Oh, I didn't even know there was a colorized version.
There is. The only thing that makes it any good is that the title card, and the title card comes up and it's in color, and they put it like in this like pukey seaweed green. It looks really cool. Because it's kind of like a 3D almost, the way it came from beneath the sea. Yeah. It's a very particular font. So that looks pretty cool. Otherwise, it's completely unnecessary. In fact, I think it detracts probably from the movie, which we'll get into with some of these other ones. Because like you said, it was black and white. You can kind of hide some stuff.
Right.
But
not a lot. I mean, you can still see that giant tentacle is not sharing the same space as everything else.
That's correct.
I mean, yeah. And I'm wondering now I'm kind of curious about the colorized version, because I don't know if that would make it better or worse. I'm thinking makes it worse.
I haven't seen the black and white version, but based on my experience of watching this in color, I would say maybe it worse. Okay. So the special effects, this is the first time the special effects are by Ray Harryhausen. And in fact, the script for this movie was specifically designed because they wanted to make a Harryhausen movie. They wanted to make a monster movie, and they wanted Harryhausen to be the guy. So they wrote the script around the set pieces they wanted him to make. So can we consider this one of the first movies that put special effects before stories?
Oh, this is hands down. I mean, there's only one reason people would go to see this movie is to see a giant octopus tearing down Golden Gate Bridge, or, what are the other coastal line South San Francisco landmarks, or he's bringing down a ship or a submarine. That's the only reason to watch this movie. That's all it is. There's no other reason. And it's a product of its time. In the 50s, atomic age giant monster movies were the thing. You know what I mean? You have Godzilla, which came out, I think, maybe a year or two before this, which is still, in my mind, the gold standard of that genre. But then you had a ton of others. You had, Them, which was giant ants. You had Tarantula, which obviously giant tarantula.
Night of the Lepus.
Night of the Lepus. That was later. Now that was in the 70s. But that one's pretty bad. Another one from this era that is better than this is another Ray Harryhausen was The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was in my notes.
If you had to pick a radioactive monster goes amok, 1950s stop motion movie, I think that one's obviously superior.
So when Heather sent this in, I did a double check I was like, did I get that title wrong? Because I thought for sure it would have been The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, but I was like, no, she wrote It Came From Beneath the Sea. So I'm hoping she didn't. Heather, I hope you know what you're asking for. Because I was surprised it was this one, because
I would have gone with The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. In fact, I thought that came out before this. I could be wrong. Obviously,
it did. No, it did. It came out in 1953, and it was actually there was three kind of things that semi-inspired this movie. The first thing that inspired it, according to legend, right, was the hydrogen bomb. And that kind of that and the dropping obviously of the atomic bomb in Japan, which was the impetus for Godzilla. Basically, the 50s we enter into by the late 40s, the atomic age. And so all of these horror movies and B movies and sci-fi movies, they're all obsessed with this idea of some XYZ gets exposed to radiation, becomes a giant monster.
Yes.
Right?
Man should have never tampered with this type of thing. Yeah.
So this movie's definitely in league with that. So that was partially the inspiration. And the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms was partially inspiration. I think that's where they just kind of wanted to like, okay, let's get that guy, let's get him to make another monster, and then we'll just figure out the story around the special effects.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure they had sets built and that octopus going well before they had even the entire movie plotted out. They maybe had new storyboards and said, hey, you know what? It takes a while. You got to shoot 1 second per frame. So get cracking on that giant octopus, and we'll worry about things that go around it later.
Yeah, that was a
very loose story with people you don't care about, and you wanted to see Golden Gate Bridge torn down. That's what you're getting.
Now you said get cracking. Is that a pun intended? Because if it's a pun intended, it's a pun received.
I'm going to say yes.
It's a pun received by Fred.
That's
now, did you notice something about this octopus? There's something very, very famous about the octopus in this film.
You mean that it's missing 2 tentacles?
That's right. For budgetary reasons.
They didn't have the budget. They didn't have the budget for 8 tentacles.
They came to Harryhausen and they said, hey, for your giant octopus movie, can't do 8 legs. It's an octopus.
Right, we got the budget for 6. That's all you got.
That shows you right there, Matt, the level of I don't want to put this creative integrity behind this film. They're like, we have no idea for a movie. All we know is we want to make a monster movie. By this point, Harryhausen is ascended as the guy. So we're going to get the guy to make a monster for a monster movie so we can sell it to teenagers at drive-ins.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. This is getting kids to show up to this was probably a double feature on a Saturday matinee with some other giant monster.
I'm sure. I'm sure it was.
That's all it was. Or like you said, drive-in fodder.
And then he gets into it. He's working the creature. They come to him and go, "No, get rid of 2 limbs. Can't afford them."
We can't. Yeah, we can't. Too much to pay for. Yeah. We'll hope nobody notices. Nobody's going to count them.
I don't.
They didn't even.
Okay, Matt. I got a confession time here for you.
Yeah.
I don't like 50s B movies. I don't like it.
Oh wow.
I don't like any of them, and here's why.
Okay.
It's just a lot of white guys standing around in labs. They're just basically just bad sets and or like high school chemistry classrooms. And they're just monologuing. And the vast majority of these movies is just people talking about just stuff that doesn't matter, and you don't care about the characters. There's always a love triangle. There's always a female, but because it's the 50s.
Then there's shots of the military, and you've got the general pointing to something in the distance. And yes, it's definitely a formula.
It is a formula, and it drives me insane. I find it, it's like paint drying. And the only exception I can make for this movie is, while it is all of those things I just said, one, that the submarine set, which I think they maybe actually shot part of it on like a real submarine. I might be mistaken about that.
Maybe, I don't know.
It looks very good. The submarine set that they're on looks really good. That's about it.
Like I said, there's really not much to talk about this. It's a giant octopus. It's attacking the city. I find it funny because it's how far into the city is it going to go? You know what I mean?
There's
not much far it can go. It's not like Godzilla. It's not going to climb on the land and start stomping
things.
That's
exactly right.
Yeah.
It's a coastal crisis at best. Let it have the coast. Just move inland.
Right. By the way, I'm gonna a slight aside here.
Sure.
Have you ever seen one of the more recent Godzilla movies? The most recent one in Japan was called Shin Godzilla. Came out about 6 years ago.
I've seen it. And it's kind of, I recall nothing about it other than I think it's kind of a deconstruction of Godzilla, right? Isn't that right?
Right. But one of the best parts of it in my mind was there was a lot of bureaucratic argument over whose job is it to take care of this. If he's in the bay, that's the Coast Guard's job.
Right.
If it gets on land, then, you know. So you can think about this with this octopus. It's like, well, you know, if you're the Army, you're like, well, I mean, it's not coming on land. That's not my business.
It's a Navy issue.
You know, let's take care of this. Yeah.
I did laugh.
So.
I got one laugh out of a line I was not supposed to laugh at. At one point, there's two random sailors. They're talking about it, and because this the sub that they're in is radioactive. It's a nuclear sub,
right?
And so they're there with just the isotopes. And the guy goes, I don't know. I hear it makes you so you can't have children, which I thought was just a fun. His line delivery is hilarious. And then the captain goes, well, we won't be down here too long, so we don't have to worry about that. And then I thought to myself, don't people work down there? There's a whole crew of people working in that room. And the captain and the other guy, Mac or whatever his name is, that you might not have to be down there very long. But what about the crew that's down there? We're
not worried about them having children.
Yeah.
They're married to the sea anyway.
I love that the level of scientific knowledge about like radiation at this point was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they didn't really know that much back then, right? That's why they're able to make these movies just, you know, like, hey, we don't really know what's going to happen. Maybe it makes giant, you know, insects and
it makes giant monsters
and
sterilizes men. That's all that it does.
Right. Yeah. That's two things. Yeah.
Yeah. And
good for two things.
It's hilarious to me.
There's only one other thing of note on this, and I didn't even realize this until I went back and looked at the cast. Have you ever seen the movie The Aviator?
Yes, I have. Yep.
Okay. I don't know if you remember the scene where Howard Hughes is dating this rather young actress.
Oh no!
And
she
gets mad late. She gets mad later and tries to ram her car into when she gets jealous because he's out with Ava Gardner. Yeah. Well, the actress who he's dating there, that's the one that played the lead in here.
That's Dr. Joyce, the lady scientist.
Yes. Faith Demure is the name of the actress. That's who that character was in The Aviator. Well, so in real life, she dated Howard Hughes.
By her name, I have Va Voom. She's in a really weird, like she's kind of maybe sleeping with the scientist, but she ends up kind of being provocative with the Navy captain.
Right.
It's never really defined, and it's just sort of like it's just like passed back and forth by these men. And it's a really weird thing because as a character, she kind of has more autonomy than you would think as a woman in the 50s as a scientist. Because at some point she has a line about like, oh God, they're sitting around talking, and basically he's like, why don't you quit your job and come on the road with me, honey? Like something like that. And she's like, I'm a successful scientist. Like, why don't you quit your job and come with me or something like that. I was like, okay, all right. That's a little spicy.
That's a little advanced for that
age. It is,
but,
yeah.
But you know, and as far as like, you know, her having any kind of relationship stuff like that, I'm sure they knew their audience is, you know, what, 8-9-year-old boys, 10-year-old
horny teen boys.
They don't care about this. But yeah, at the most, they don't care about this. They don't care who she ends up with. They don't care what her job is. They don't care any of this. They don't care what the other people's job is. They want to see somebody fight. They want to see the monster tear something down. They want to see the military blow up the monster.
Yeah, she's on the beach at one point. She does, I think she's maybe in a bikini, if I'm not mistaken, or a swimsuit or something.
Yeah.
They heavily imply they have sex at the beach. It was like a little more risque in some ways, like sexually, and the sexual politics. I thought it was. One thing that is very, very old, I should say it's very old-timey, but it isn't given everything we know about the way the world works, but is that workplace sexual harassment is just as American as full-flavored, invigorating cigarettes and all-American Colombian coffee, right?
You know, if you were to follow a busy doctor as he makes his daily round of calls, you'd find yourself having a mighty busy time keeping up with him. Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose. In a repeated national survey, doctors in all branches of medicine, doctors in all parts of the country were asked, What cigarette do you smoke, Doctor? Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Why not change to Camels for the next 30 days and see what a difference it makes in your smoking enjoyment? See how Camels agree with your throat. See how mild and good tasting a cigarette can be.
Like she's getting literally harassed at her job.
Yeah,
and like I'm surprised this army captain isn't like trying to squeeze her ass in the movie, like or giving her a slap, and it's like, and then, so it's just there's something about it where it's like, it's kind of distasteful that she kind of ends up with him, but then again, the movie kind of redeems itself because she kind of like is like, I'm not quitting my job, like. To be with you, so I don't know, because he wants her to like quit the job and become a housewife, and she's like, "Nah, I'm not doing that." So
I'm sticking with the job. Hey, but good for her. Yeah. Like I said, this was an easy bottom of the list of this.
The only thing that matters about this is the monster. The monster isn't in all that much. It's not that impressive, especially in color. They shoot it with some flamethrowers. It goes back in the sea. They blow it up. End of story.
And I can't even remember if you ever see the entire monster all at once.
No, I don't think so.
I mean, it's a lot of tentacle. It's a lot of here's the head just poking a little bit up out of the water, and even in the underwater scenes, it's really murky. You're not going to see a lot. So no.
Yeah, that's all there really is to say about it, right? They're selling you tentacles.
Yeah.
They're selling you a little bit of eye candy with the female doctor.
Yeah. And that's about it.
And the rest of it is just, I thought I was going to have to fast forward the movie at one point, and it's not that long because it's definitely it's like 90 minutes or less, because it's definitely part of a double feature. This one for sure.
Yes, absolutely,
and
absolutely.
It's just when they were on the radio, they just kept saying over.
Oh, can you hear me? Over. Oh, I got you right here, Steve. Over. Hey, you can see the monster over. Yeah, not quite yet over, but we're in the helicopter over.
And it just goes, this scene, and what it is it's filler. All of these dialogue scenes, they could accomplish the same thing in like a minute, but they're all 10 minutes long because it's all filler. Those are all the parts where you're supposed to be making out.
Yeah. Here's the part where you get it on with your date in the theater.
That's the part. That is when you get your first handy, or as we like to call them here at Binge Movies, old fashions. You get your first old fashioned, and then the monster comes back on, and then you look at the monster and you go ooh, and then you go back to fooling around. That's all this movie is, and because of that, it is not my worst of the week, surprisingly. But it's pretty darn close. It's my number 4. Give it a 5 out of 10.
I gave it a 5.
Yeah.
I also did. And I have a feeling I know what your bottom of the list is, and it's going to be interesting to discuss that next forth. So we'll see. I think I have an idea in my head already what it is.
Let's see if you're right. Where do you rank this one? If this is your 5 for you, where's that for you? Is this
this is bottom, and I had it at a 5 too. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, let's keep it moving. Let's go along to a movie called The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, which currently has a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Wow. Okay. And I enjoy it. I mean, it's clearly only being reviewed by people who like these movies.
Correct.
I mean, if you're going to review this on the basis of a gripping story, it's
he's messy. Okay, that's a woman's. What do you mean messy? My shirt's on the floor. Did the house fall down? Did the children die? Did the day go on? Does he work? Does he have a job? Leave the shirt on the ground. It ain't your shirt. Why are you stalking him around the house, following him? That's his clothes. Those are not your clothes. Look at this. Don't bother me. Look at that. Look at that. Don't bother me. You can't take it. You can't take that. Learn to do this.
This film was directed by Nathan H. Jurin. It was written by Kenneth Kolb. It is based on Sinbad the Sailor from 1001 Nights. It was released December 23rd, 1958, just in time for Christmas. On a budget of $650,000, it made $3.2 million in U.S. and Canada alone. Sinbad must go on a quest to retrieve a magic lamp in order to save his true love and fulfill his destiny. This took 11 months to complete, and for the full color widescreen stop motion. This is the first movie where he patents or comes up with the term dynamation, dynamic animation, which he would become synonymous with.
Yes.
You gotta love white folks playing Arabs. There's going to be a lot of that.
Yeah, always. Yeah, I've never seen a Sinbad movie where Sinbad wasn't a white dude.
Jesus.
Every time.
Here's what I will say: the movie doesn't waste any time getting to the fantasy elements.
Yes.
I think originally I was like, okay, this is the first one as I'm watching these in chronological order, where okay, now we're in color. Now we're in 58. We're getting close to the 60s. It's starting to feel like a little bit more of a modern movie. The direction seems to be a little bit better. The score is bigger than the other two movies. It's got a big score.
It's Bernard Herrmann.
Bernard Herrmann. And I was
I mean, you can't get much better than him at that era.
I was getting ready to praise the score, and I really liked it at the beginning. And by the end, I found it to be so loud, so repetitive, so obnoxious that actually it took points away from me. It went from something that was actually going to elevate the movie, because it's like, oh, okay, Bernard Herrmann, yeah, here we go, to I think this is a terrible score, and I think it's so inane to listen to, as this entire movie is. I found this entire film to be grueling to get through, because there is so much focus on Sinbad. And I don't find him cool. I don't find him this great swashbuckler. I don't find his journey interesting. It is just a bunch of people wandering around, and you're just waiting until a giant monster appears. You're just waiting for a Cyclops or this or
that. But the good thing is they don't skimp on that.
They don't.
And like you said,
they don't.
Yeah. And you don't have to wait. This isn't like Jaws where you have to wait, halfway to the movie to see the monster. You see that Cyclops very early in the movie.
And he's in a lot of it too. He's in a lot of them.
Yes. And honestly, and this is one of those movies I'm going to rank higher than yours, just based on the creatures. There's creatures in this movie that in my mind are iconic, with the Cyclops being one of them. And we can get to the other ones later, but I'm gonna kick
it over to you, because I thought this movie was terrible.
Okay.
So rather than me rag on it for 40 minutes,
no, it's okay.
Tell me why you love this movie.
It's all about the special effects. The story is just, who cares? You've got the evil magician. You've got a princess. You've got an evil magician.
A child genie.
You've got. You've got the child genie. That was just really weird. Really weird. I didn't get that at all. Yeah, especially because there's been plenty of movies before. Maybe they wanted to differentiate themselves from Thief of Baghdad or something. Well, we don't want this, what people think of as genie. So we're just maybe the kid was like a producer's son or something. I don't know.
Real weird.
Yeah, he's weird. It makes no sense. You can actually take the genie out of it altogether.
Yes.
And have some other kind of MacGuffin that the magician needs. You know what I mean? Because that's what it all comes down to. He needs the lamp. He loses the lamp when he runs away from the Cyclops. And then it's basically his skullduggery to get them back to the island so he can get the lamp. You know what I mean?
That's it.
That's all there is to it. I mean, and somehow everybody's so stupid they can't see that he's the one causing the problems. You know what I mean?
That's why I found it so excruciating to get through.
I found it hilarious that the shady magician who already was causing problems at the wedding by turning the handmaiden into the snake woman. Yes. Although that was just for show, I guess he turned her back. But and that one's an interesting one. That's like there's a few creatures in here that in my mind are precursors to ones used later. So the Snake Woman, to me, is his first draft of what would be Medusa in Clash of the Titans. And then the skeleton fight at the end is obviously his first draft of his most famous creation, which is the big skeleton army fight in Jason and the Argonauts.
Well, so if you know anything about stop motion, this is a very weird term that they use, but there's a term called cannibalizing. Yeah. And what that means is, like, exactly what you're saying, right? You create something in this case, but like the snake woman is the first draft of Medusa, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
So often what he would do is because what's underneath, whether it be clay or a mixture of whatever he's using in real fur or whatever it is that the different implements that he's using to create the creature, what he would often do is he would strip it down to its wire frame.
Right, to the armature.
The armatures,
Yep.
Maybe tweak the armatures a little bit or improve them or do nothing at all and then just re-sculpt something over the skeleton, basically. And so that's called cannibalizing, right? You take parts and pieces from creations.
Yeah.
So he did this frequently throughout his career. And so really, you can really say what you're saying is not just like a nice metaphor. It's really true. It's basically, as we go through the next 3 films in particular, you see he's like, it's reiterations and improvements and revampings on what he did a time or two.
Yeah,
before.
I'm sure as he got older and he thought, hey, you know what? I did this already, but I think I can do it better.
Yeah, that's it.
So let me change it a little. I mean, if you look at the Kraken from Clash of the Titans, it looks almost just like a creature from, there was a movie he did called 20 Million Miles to Earth, and the alien monster called the Ymir. If you just added an extra pair of arms to it and put a fishtail on it, and made it bigger, it's the Kraken.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So they look very similar. But yeah, you're right. And I think it's a lot of like, I'm sure he just, looks back on his old work and says, hey, you know what? That was okay. Maybe I can make up my game a little the next time.
I
did one skeleton. Right. I did one.
There's more detail in the miniatures. There's greater fluidity. He starts getting better and better with the scale of how it interacts with, the real objects in the frame or smaller objects. So yeah, you can see him kind of essentially the easiest way to summarize halfway through this episode, Ray Harryhausen, is he didn't invent this style of special effects, stop motion.
Right.
But he took it to about as far as you could until you get to like Phil Tippett.
Yes.
And then
Agreed.
Phil Tippett pretty much maxed out what was capable with stop motion as far as live action feature films.
Right, yeah. But when you get into animated, obviously there's still plenty to be done. You've got Leica, you've got Aardman, you've got all kinds of other studios still doing this stuff and doing a great job with it too.
But basically Harryhausen passes the torch to Tippett. Tippett runs with it, and then from that point on, we basically from Clash of the Titans to Jurassic Park. That's pretty much the end of the stop motion era.
Use of stop motion. Yeah. I mean, it was used, sparingly. I mean, if you watch in a lot of 80s movies, like watch RoboCop, you can see there's
that's Phil Tippett
in that. Yeah, Phil Tippett. Yeah, there you go. And the original Star Wars trilogy uses, especially Empire Strikes Back, uses a lot of stop motion.
That's 100% it.
Yeah.
So what he's doing at this point in his career, now that he's the guy, and Dynamation is the thing, and he's created a name for it, and it's becoming kind of a marketing gimmick. And it's like, see the new Harryhausen wonder, right? It's how they're marketing these movies.
Mm-hmm.
By the time we get to Sinbad, we're at 1958. He's kind of in the prime of his career.
Yes.
And he's going to do, over the next couple of movies we talk about, the work that is basically his definitive work. When you think Harryhausen, like you said, you think the skeletons from this film and Jason the Argonauts, you think the Kraken, you think Medusa, and it's all right here in this movie. And that's the best thing that I can say about it. So I'll kick it back to you.
This is strictly, I'm just going to say, I cannot defend the story. I can't defend the acting or the direction. All of that, to me, is meaningless. To me, it's about the monsters. It's about the technical skill that went into making that dragon look cool, that making that Cyclops look cool. The Rock looked okay, I thought. You know what I mean? And that was the Snake Woman, I thought, looked pretty good. The skeleton looked really good up until, I don't know. There's the one part of this movie makes me laugh is when he defeats the skeleton. They cut to clearly the prop guy just dropped a fake skeleton on the ground. You know what I mean? It's just, it's not even the model.
Yeah,
it's just like, okay, it's just, hey, you up to get up on the ladder and throw these bones, these plastic bones on the ground, and good enough, know. But
so when you were a kid, do you remember seeing this for the first time, or do you have a distinct memory? Take me back to that moment when.
Okay, but I'll tell you this: there's 3 Sinbad movies.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, the other 2 got played a lot more.
I wonder
if you can believe that. Yes, the other ones there was after this. There was Golden Voyage of Sinbad. That one was on all the time. And then there's another one called Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. That was like in the late 70s, also on all the time. And those, I would say of the 3, Golden Voyage is probably the best. But again, they're all insipid stories. It's always some kind of evil sorcerer. It's some princess in peril. It's we've got to collect this item. Got to go to this island. We got to do this thing. It's all the same thing. You'll see more recognizable actors in those other ones. I think, if I remember right, Jane Seymour, I think, was in Eye of the Tiger. Oh, the bad guy in Golden Voyage was Tom Baker. I don't know if you ever watched Doctor Who as a kid, but he was the 4th Doctor. I think he got the job based on the Sinbad movie.
Wow.
I think. Well, yeah, which is weird because he was just an over the top, evil.
Yeah.
Sorcerer. I mean, no, playing basically might as well be the same guy from this movie, just looks different. You know what I mean?
So were sword and sorcery, sword and sandal, sword and adventure movies because that's what the rest of these are, right?
Yes.
Were they Marvel movies before Marvel movies?
I don't know. I mean, I think of if I think of like a more of a cohesive like universe, like what you get with MCU now. In my mind, as a kid, it was more the Godzilla movies. You know what I mean? That was always when they all of a sudden he's the superhero. So now he's the good guy and he's fighting this monster. Now he's a good guy and he's fighting this monster. That felt more like it than these, I guess. I mean, like I said,
take the cinematic universe piece away. And just the idea of sort of bland,
of like a hero, I guess so. I mean,
fantastical things, and,
right, yeah, exactly. I mean, basically back then, when is this one in the?
This is 58.
58. I mean, what would you have? You would have this kind of action movie, and you would have what westerns. I mean, I can't think of. I'm sure as far as what probably captured. Teenagers' imaginations, maybe westerns might have topped it. I don't know. Certainly with adults, I'm sure.
Yeah,
probably more geared towards westerns.
Yeah, at this point, you basically have, as far as a ton of B movies, sci-fi, horror, alien invasion, whatever. We set that aside. That's kind of the last film. As far as like mainstream box office, you had big musicals, and you had westerns. And many of them big westerns, right? Big epic westerns.
Oh, sure.
And then you had this sort of stuff. And I think because here's the deal. My dad grew up outside of Oklahoma City, and he would have been, a kid, a movie going age kid when this film came out. And
sure.
He at that time, this is the way he described it. At that time, there was nothing in Oklahoma City. And it would get so hot. And a lot of people did not have air conditioning in their homes.
Yes, that was a big selling point to those theaters. They say air conditioning. That would be above everything else. Air conditioning.
So when it was peak summer, it was actually too hot to play outside as a kid. So what the parents would do is they would send their kids on Saturdays to a sometimes double feature, sometimes even longer than that, because it would be a double bill of movies. But they would also have, they were still doing this. They would run old, like Three Stooges or Abbott and Costello, like old serials, basically. They would run old, they would have been older even then, older Looney Tunes and different cartoons. And then there was obviously being an intermission. And so you could spend basically your entire Saturday, and him and my aunt, who was older than him, they'd go together, and it was just being nothing but kids. And the parents would just drop their kids off. It was like, it wasn't free, but it was relatively cheap babysitting. You give your kid money for
got
snacks.
Him out of the house.
Yep. Get them out of the house. You don't have to worry about them getting heat stroke, and you know where they're at.
Or getting into trouble. Yes. You know where they are. This is a giant romper room. This is babysitter.
That's exactly
you know
it. And my dad sat through all of these movies and so many Westerns, but he sat through all of these movies. And you're 100% right. The way that he basically, it's almost like Westerns and musicals. This is, we're kind of putting a hat on at the time. So I don't believe this way. But a lot of musicals were for ladies, right? They were a lot of romances or this, that, whatever. They were for women. And then you had a lot of big Westerns, and those were for men, you know, the John Wayne, the peak American masculinity, right? And
sure.
And then you had these movies, which were kind of for, I guess, everybody, but they were really, the big market for them were kids and teens. And so I think it's interesting that, you know, 10, 15 years down the road, maybe a little bit more, here you are as a kid watching this on UHF or your local TV station, and it was still appealing to you. So it was obviously successful at what it was doing. And that's where I think the similarity between these types of sword and sorcery movies and Marvel is, because so much of the appeal
and that's actually that's a very good point, because growing up, I grew up in the 70s, in the early 80s, there was nothing like Marvel movies. There were no, I mean, not until the first Superman movie did I ever see a superhero movie at all.
So Sinbad
You know what I mean?
is a superhero. Jason
he's
is
your
a
superhero. That's right.
Hercules is a superhero.
Right.
Perseus is a superhero.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Just in the same way that I think comic books, you know, obviously borrowed, and especially the Jack Kirby stuff, borrowed very heavily from Greek and Roman mythology. And they're basically, you know, just like the demigods and even the gods themselves had all this fantastic power, but had a lot of like mortal foibles. They lusted, they got drunk, they did all this sort of stuff, which is different than a lot of the other, you know, the big three Abrahamic religions, their view of their deities. So, you know,
and these movies, by the way, these movies play real loose with mythology.
Yes.
You know what I mean, like this is an Arabic myth, and they've got the Cyclops from Greek mythology in here. You know what I mean? It's Clash of the Titans is a Greek thing, but it's got the Kraken, which is a Norse, giant octopus. You know, it's they don't care. You know, they're like, here's a name, we're going to stick it to it. Here's a fun looking creature, we're going to put it in there. If it fits, it fits.
As long as it sounds old and ancient and foreign.
Yes, yes.
So I think that you can draw like a line between kind of that era. Again, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. I think you can draw a line between that era and there's obviously differences. And, you know, there's obviously, there's the connected universe element and blah, 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 blah. That has, I think, way more to do with vertical integration on a corporate level than it does with like a story level, even though it is borrowed from comic books a little bit. I think if you wanted big, quote unquote, action movies with fantastical heroes on big quests with big, again, at that time, cutting edge special effects, mind blowing special effects, that's the audience that these movies serve. And now, as a grown man who did not grow up in the 70s and did not grow up in the 60s and did not grow up in the 50s and was not watching these in the theater and having my mind blown, I wanted to kind of give a shit about what was happening in the movie. And of all of them, I gave a shit the least about what was going on here. And
there's like I said, there's really nothing going on here to be excited about, and it's the same story repeated in so many of these books.
Oh my, yeah. I mean, well, you'll notice that in my descriptions of the films moving forward. So I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 10, and it is my worst of this binge. I honestly, I didn't care for this at all. And here's the thing, okay?
Yep.
A lot you can get by with a lot if the star of the movie, the main protagonist, the main hero, has charisma.
Yeah, this guy has none.
Zero, right? So if
that's why when they do these other Sinbad movies, they're interchangeable. It's not the same guy. Who cares? Nobody remembers. Nobody cares.
If this guy had been this dashing, charismatic figure with some funny or smart or quippy dialogue, or if it had been a little snappier on a character level, again, I could kind of overlook, because I'm repeating myself, but again, with Mighty Joe Young, it had the special effects, and yes, they've aged, but also had characters.
Yes, agreed.
And so it's like, oh, okay. And even Joe was a character. So it's like, oh, okay. I have something here, someone to care about. I care about this relationship between Jill and Joe. I care about how Joe is being treated. He's a sympathetic figure. He's a charm. I'll put it like this. Joe from Mighty Joe Young, which was a puppet, has 1,000 times the charisma of any human being in the seventh voyage of
in this
Sinbad.
movie. Yeah. I think
he's a better protagonist than Sinbad. How bad?
I can easily say that.
How bland does your writing have to be that you can't make Sinbad interesting?
By the way, here's something I didn't realize, obviously, when I saw this movie as a kid. And it wasn't until I rewatched it now and looked up the credits that the actress who played the princess in this movie is Bing Crosby's wife.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So can you imagine her taking him to the premiere of this? I'm sure he's like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, she gets shrunk down and then slides into the genie's lamp, and then so weird.
Yeah,
so weird.
So,
even again, terrible.
Yeah. Now, obviously, my grading is higher than yours, but just keep in mind, I'm basing this purely on aesthetics. I'm basing this on those monsters look cool to me then. Yeah. They look cool to me now. So I have this at number 3 in my list. So I had a rating of, what did I have it at? Maybe like 6.8 or something like that.
Okay, all right. So you're
but if you had to redo this and say talk about story and stuff like that, obviously Mighty Joe Young is going to leapfrog right over this.
Yeah.
But I'm basing this strictly on the enjoyment I got as a child or even as an adult of just appreciating the aesthetics of the creature design and the special.
No, I think that's completely fair in an episode that's dedicated to a special effects guy. Well, let's move on to Jason and the Argonauts, which currently has an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Now, from the makers of Sinbad, Columbia Pictures presents Jason and the Argonauts. The mightiest band of warriors the world has ever known.
Turn back, Jason! We're trapped!
Sailing to the ends of the earth, battling against an incredible number of obstacles.
Where will you find this miracle?
I have heard there is a tree at the end of the world, with a fleece of gold hanging in its branches.
In search of the fabulous magic golden fleece, Jason and the Argonauts, caught in the clutches of the towering bronze giant Talos, battered by treacherous falling rocks, taming vulturous harpies, facing the dreaded seven-headed Hydra, battling the merciless army of skeletons. Jason and the Argonauts, the classic story of Jason, a man who challenged the gods. Medea, a temple dancer who betrayed a kingdom for love. The Argonauts, the mightiest band of warriors the world has ever known. Jason and the Argonauts, a classic adventure story, brought to the screen through the incredible special effects magic of Dinorama. Jason and the Argonauts, the search that became a legend.
So I'm guessing there was very few people that reviewed the Sinbad movie.
That's right.
100%.
I think that's right.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay. That's wild.
It was directed by John Chaffee. It was written by Apolinos Rodeos. It's a screenplay by Beverly Cross and Jen Reed. It is based on... No, it's not. It's not. It's the Argonautica. No, it's not. Which was from 3rd century BC. It's not. Very loosely based. It is released June 19th, 1963 on a budget of $3 million. It only made $2.1 million.
Yeah, that would be considered a disappointment.
Yes.
I guess at that time. Yeah.
Jason must go on a quest for the Golden Fleece to save his kingdom and fulfill his destiny. Okay. This is the movie that I have an odd personal connection with because my dad saw this movie as a kid. Or young man at the very least, we should say. A teenager. And he fell in love with the name Jason from this movie. And this is my namesake. I was named after
I love
Jason and the Argonauts.
Oh my gosh, this is probably the best story ever. I love it.
So yes. So when I was a little kid, I was, why did you name me Jason? And my dad was adamant with my mom. If it's a boy, we're going to name him Jason. He was adamant. And my mom got, overruled. She wanted to call me Justin, I think, or something else.
Yeah.
He's like, no, Jason. And he said it's because of this story. And then he was so, wrapped up in the movie of Jason the Argonauts, that he eventually would go on to read the myths from the Argonautica of Jason and So he actually read the actual stories of Jason. And obviously Jason is a transliteration of a Greek name. It appears in the New Testament in the book of Acts because it is a Greek name. So it's just replaced the J with an I, and there you go. So it's an old name. I have a very old name, a very common name, but it comes from this movie. And
hey, you know what? I got to say props to your dad for getting that through. When my kids were born, anytime I brought up any kind of geeky name for my son, my wife was like, nope. I would bring up a name. She's like, what's that from? And I would say, and she's like, nope.
I think Jason is probably an easier sell than like Obi-Wan Kenobi.
It is. It truly is. And
what were some of the names? What were some of the names you remember from some of your geeky stuff?
It's funny because I told this one on the last time I was on Real Spoilers when we talked about Dune.
Oh boy,
you saw Dune?
Oh
correct?
yes.
Okay, so the character Duncan Idaho.
Yes,
I threw out that name to my wife. I was like, "Well, how about Duncan?" She was like, she thought it was like some kind of Scottish thing. She goes, "Okay, maybe." She goes, "What about middle name?" I said, "Idaho." Oh. She's like, "What the hell is that?"
You should have gone with Duncan MacLeod from the Clan MacLeod.
Yeah. She goes. I was like, from Dune. She goes, "No, we're not doing that." And here's the best was, we finally settled on a name, and after he was born, she called the local newspaper to put in the birth announcement. And the woman said, "Well, what's your son's name?" She said Xander, and she goes, "Oh, that's such a unique name." She goes, "My daughter has a real unique name. We named her Alia after the character in Dune." And I was just like, "You see people doing it."
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. But I think that's awesome. I like this. I really like that your dad had this kind of connection with the movie, and I like that. I like that story a lot.
I don't want to correct how you named your kids, but I'm going to right here on this podcast. Here's how you should have played it with your wife. Okay, you sit down with her and you're like, hey, I have a name. It's works male or female. It really means a lot to me. I just want you to hear me out. I want you to hear me out, honey. It means a lot to me. I want to name our child Idaho. And she would have looked at you like you were absolutely insane.
Oh, you start with the worst part.
That's right. And then
I love it.
Then you hold out for weeks. You're like, no, Idaho. Honey, please. It has to be Idaho. And then you come to her and like you're very pensive and you go, well, baby, I was thinking, and you're probably right. Idaho's not a good one, but that name still means a lot to me. So could we just go with Duncan? And Duncan is going to sound so reasonable in comparison to Idaho. She would have had.
I love this train of thought.
Come on, you got to manipulate your lady, man.
Yeah. We got to. It's funny because the second son around, we did get a character namesake in there. We read to our oldest son. When he was younger, we read Where the Wild Things Are a lot. Yeah. So we settled on Max for our second son. So there at least there was some kind of like connection.
Any more kids in your future? Story.
No, it's
done, huh?
The tubes have been snipped. It's over.
I couldn't convince you to adopt a child and name it Slimer.
Yes, Slimer.
Listen, we're now in 2022. The world is a very, very weird place. Names don't mean anything. Time doesn't mean anything. Society is breaking down all around us. Let's just start naming our kids. Look, people name their dogs human names. People got, a French bulldog named Kevin, or a French bulldog named like, Michael or something. Let's name our kids after the things that we love. I think you should adopt a child from anywhere in the world. Let's just say Africa, and you can name it Slimer. Would you do that for me?
If I could get away with it, I think I would. I am a big Ghostbusters fan, so why not?
That's what I want from you. I want a video of you presenting this to your wife and say, "Hey, I met this guy on the podcast. I only talked to him for an hour, but he wants us to adopt a child named Slimer."
He made a very convincing argument that you have a child named Slimer.
That's right. He made a very
people will always remember the name.
I know it sounds crazy, honey, but if you had heard how he presented it, it just made so much sense.
Yeah, it's so unique. There's not going to be any other slime in my class. I guarantee
no other Slimers. That's right. And you can call him Onion Head, as his nickname. Okay, here's what I'll say about this. My name aside, ancient Greece, I think, seems more it seems more accessible. And I think it's because that is the foundation of Western civilization.
Right.
So there's something about ancient Greece and ancient Rome and kind of this era. And I've I had a history minor for a while, and I actually had a double major in history at one point, and then decided I wanted to graduate. I didn't want to take any more classes. So I needed a few more credits to get the degree. And I was like, nope, I'm just going to graduate with my primary degree. So I always found in all of history, that part of human civilization was the most interesting, because from the philosophers and, Platonism and Aristotle and Aristotelian rhetoric and, the burgeoning ideas of a republic and even a little bit of democracy and so forth and so on. It's all there. It's everything you can paint from the era of Hellenization to the Roman Empire to the British Empire to, basically the foundation of this country. Once we got to Britain, I didn't care anymore. But the lead up into ancient Greece and their empire and then the Roman Empire, I always found that to be such an interesting part of history. And it's so easy it's easier for me at the very least to relate to that world and those characters. And so I much preferred the setting of this film and the next two films, this one and the next one on the list. I just wish I cared a little bit more about Jason, because I feel like we're cooking with gas. Okay, this is a sort of film that is the precursor to a great many modern movies. This feels like, even though it's 63, a big budget modern movie.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of big set pieces. There's a lot to do in here,
But there's iconic stuff in here. The skeleton fight is what I was thinking of.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
that honestly still looks pretty darn good. And it is 100% the direct inspiration for the Terminator as far as their skeletons. And I mean, from the original film, and what they look like underneath the organic material comes right from this movie. And this movie has been so influential for the likes of James Cameron and so many other young directors who saw this. And young directors are now all elderly, but at the time they were young people and they saw this movie, and it's been spun off and iterated and so many other stuff. This is just a source code for a lot of things that we lived with throughout the 80s and to today. I appreciate it on that level so much. And of all the movies, I found it to be one of the more engaging ones. I just wish I kind of cared a little bit more about Jason. Although I will say, of the protagonists of the last three that we're talking about, I think he's the best one. And it's not just because we share a name. Yeah. He actually seems kind of like a person.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, and what I like about this movie too is it's not just heroes being heroic. You've got people look at Hercules in this movie. He makes a big mistake, and then he has to have penance for it.
Does that not seem okay? Is this my modern brain? Because I have a note here. Explain to me, because you were there close to the time that this came out, closer than I was for sure.
Right.
When Hercules is introduced, and it's like, oh, this is Hercules, and he's just kind of a background player, right? But it's Hercules, and then he fucks up. He messes up royally.
Yep.
And gets up. Somebody's killed because of his actions.
Yes.
And then as penance, he goes off on his own. And then Hera's like, oh, well, the fates have decided that Hercules, his journey goes a different path, right?
Right. Now, we're going to put him on the 12 labors path or whatever it is.
Okay. Did that not feel like a setup for a Hercules movie? Or is that my modern franchise brain being like, well, that's obviously Hercules spin-off.
I never really thought of it that way, but that is a good point. Obviously that actor, I don't know who he was. Big guy, looks like a good Hercules. He's not, like day and age now, where someone like Hercules, they've got him super cut. This guy was just a big guy, so
he's not Lou Ferrigno. He's not Arnold Schwarzenegger.
He's not Lou Ferrigno, right? He's not The Rock. He's not, right. Yeah.
Not The Rock.
But
yeah.
he's believable. He's believable as the strongest guy on the boat. You know what I mean?
Well, okay, so that raises an interesting point. So this movie is fantastical. It certainly is. But at the same time, it almost feels a little, this is going to sound silly, but almost feels a little grounded. Because
because Hercules in here never does, to my knowledge, he never shows any super strength or anything. Right. Yeah. And in fact, I'm not even quite sure did they even mention that he has any kind of connection to the gods?
I know they don't.
Yeah.
Not that I remember.
So
not that I remember.
He's more like, he seems like more like he's a folk hero, or
that's exactly right.
He's famous and he's going on a cruise and he's a great fighter and that type of thing. But it's interesting for technically he's the most of all the mythological characters in here. He's probably the most famous, and he's out halfway through the movie. You know what I mean?
I think it's an interesting choice. Yeah. He's a secondary character, and then he messes up big. He's out of the movie. Like you said, it's obviously an allusion to his story, right? Okay, he's got to go off and do his own thing. And so at the very least, maybe a more educated audience would get what that reference was. But it just, my modern franchise brain was like, oh my God, this is like a backdoor pilot for a Hercules movie.
Yeah.
Like you could come back.
That would have been a good idea. If they thought that actor could carry a whole movie, I don't know who could.
Well, back in this era, you could just recast it and said,
that's
it didn't matter.
Also look at the people they had playing Sinbad. I mean, does it really matter? Yeah.
But as a kid, when you saw this, you didn't read that as, oh, we're going to get a Hercules movie. You just were like, oh.
No. And when I was a kid at the time when I watched this, Hercules movies were really bad. You know what I mean? If you saw a Hercules movie, it was not good. So at the point when I watched this would have been late 70s, was probably the best Hercules movie I've seen. You know what I mean?
Jason and the Argonauts is the best Hercules movie.
Jason and the Argonauts is the best Hercules movie.
It might still be the best Hercules movie.
it might be, yeah.
When I was watching this, what occurred to me, Matt, is I was like, we tend to think of film as being eternal because it existed long before any of us were born, right? It's, even as we jokingly say you're an old man, you're not really old. And
I'm old.
But film existed before you were here for sure. And the oldest recorded feature film or feature length film was from 1878.
That's crazy when you think about
actually, no, the first film was 1878. The first feature length film was 1906. I got that backwards.
Was that Great Crane Robbery? Is that the?
It was the story of the Kelly Gang, which was actually an Australian movie. Oh, they've discovered that's the first feature length film. The first one was obviously the Horse in Motion, which they're referencing in Nope.
Right.
The Jordan Peele film.
I saw that in the trailer.
So this movie comes out 58 years later from that point in time. And you see the advancement in 58 years it's been made in special effects. And then I was thinking about it. I was like, okay, what is the difference between this film, which is coming out in the early 60s, and so many of the great classic movies of when we really think about big spectacle, special effects, classic movies, we think Jaws, Star Wars, the blockbuster era going through the 80s.
Yes.
And kind of peaking in the 90s, more or less. And the difference is pacing. I think what they figured out is these movies, these Harryhausen films, especially the last three, especially Jason the Argonauts, it's almost like a template for what movies would be in the 80s. What they figured out was they nailed the pacing because so many, these movies run at a slower pace. Okay. Everything is a little bit more played out. It's not as bad as the 50s B movies but there's some pacing issues. It takes a while, and they're not using that time necessarily to give us deep, thoughtful, reflective characters either. It's just there's just like a lot of dialogue scenes. A lot of the dialogue just feels very perfunctory. And I think what high concept movies from the 80s, I think basically the next generation were inspired, the Dantes the Camerons, so forth, the Spielbergs, they were inspired by the Lost Worlds, the King Kongs, the Mighty Joe Youngs, the Jason the Argonauts, but they figured out how to pace their stories and build their characters better. So you ended up kind of getting the best of all worlds. You get
Well, they learn, they take what they like the best about it, and they fix what they saw. They fix what they perceived as the mistake, which, like you said, pacing, and also acting. You know what I mean? You get better class of actors.
Yes.
You get
That's it.
you punch up the dialogue a little bit more. You know,
because here's what I'll say: all of these movies, they're all entertaining for about an hour. To me,
well, luckily most of them aren't much longer than that. Yeah, I mean, most of these are at most like an hour and a half.
But once we get past that hour mark, I'm like, let's bring it home, boys. And that last half hour feels like an additional hour to me. And I'm just sort of like, this movie has run out. Like this movie in particular, it felt like it was like I was on board. I'm entertained. I like it. It's good. I'm here for it. It's definitely better than Sinbad. This is a better movie all the way around. And then it just kept going and it kept going and it kept going and it kept going and it kept going long past the point that I think it had any reason to. So for that reason, it's only going to come in as my number 2. I give it a 7 out of 10. It was on pace to be my best of this binge, but it ran out of steam. In my opinion, I lost interest.
Now, when was the last time you had seen it? I'm assuming that your dad probably had you watch it when you were a kid.
That's correct.
It's saying how important that movie was to him. So had it been a long gap since you've seen it? I've
probably only seen it all the way through once as a kid, and then this time. Then I saw it's plays on TV, so I've seen bits and pieces.
Oh, sure.
On Turner Classic Movies, and even back in the day before AMC was.
When they were American movie classics.
Right. Yeah, they were basically a knockoff Turner Classic Movies, and
they were just Turner Classic Movies with, I believe they put commercials in.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah,
so they played a lot on there, I remember, and so I watched it in bits and pieces on there, but I probably haven't seen it in probably 25 years, at least.
Oh wow, okay, wow.
So
this to me is I own it on DVD. I couldn't tell you the last time I put the DVD in, but anytime it pops up on Turner, I watch it every time. This was one of my absolute 100% favorite movies as a kid. If this came on, this had my full attention at any given time. So it's one of those. I think sometimes when people list your favorite movies all times, it's not necessarily the best movies, but ones that were, I guess, important to you at points in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So this one always makes a list of those type of movies for me.
Wow.
Just because how much I enjoyed this one.
So your score is and your rank is?
Oh, my rank of this is number 1, easily.
Okay.
My score, and I had it as a 9, and that's just based on just how much this movie is. Not too far off from your dad. Obviously, I'm not as old as your dad, but I didn't see this in the theater. But this movie always meant something to me. You know what I mean? Of all the Harryhausen movies, this one is the pinnacle.
It's so interesting too, because it's just so much of this is a matter of when we come to this stuff.
Yep.
You saw this probably round about the same time or just before Star Wars came out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when you compare this to Star Wars, obviously special effects wise, Star Wars kind of the New Hope, but I always just call it Star Wars.
Yeah.
Kind of blows this out of the water in some regards, but in other regards, you can again draw that straight line and be like, oh, well, this is, we got to Star Wars because of Jason the Argonauts, right? Like,
what's the term? Jason the Argonauts walks so Star Wars can run.
Right? That's the perfect way to put it. So those things are more smashed together in your experience.
Yes.
You were consuming them at similar times, and they don't seem as remote and whatever. I'm on the other.
And it's not.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just saying. Also, at that time, you weren't flooded with content. You know what I mean?
That's a great point.
Nowadays, Nowadays, there's a huge spectacle movie. Every 5 minutes.
That's a great point.
And they're all available at all the times. At this point, you know what I mean? You were at the mercy of what you saw either in the theater or what happened to be shown on TV in the afternoons or at night or whenever these things popped up. So they just seemed a little bit more special then. Whereas now it would just get lost in the sea of everything else.
Well, that's a really great point because like you said, you are at the mercy of, hey, it's Saturday night in February. It's I don't know where you grew up, but let's say it's freezing cold.
Yeah. You grew up in the Midwest.
It's dark
just
at 5 p.m. or 4 p.m.
Yep.
And I've played in the snow and I'm, whatever. And now I'm warming up and I'm going to go to bed soon. And it's like, what's on TV? And it's a lot of for kids, especially like boring stuff. And then you have on one channel of the 4 or 3 that you have, Jason and the Argonauts, and that would be a treat. That would be a delight.
Absolutely, that's exactly, you hit it right on the head. That's exactly the way I always saw it.
For me,
and like I said, I always liked all these movies. This one just was, for some reason, I put higher than the other.
That makes sense. For me, I grew up in the VHS era and the home video era. So I was still at the mercy of what was shown, but I didn't have 4 channels or 3 channels. I was a kid, maybe like 25, 50.
Yeah. And you had movie channels then too. You had
That's
HBO.
It. Bingo.
Yeah.
Yep. And with my dad being a movie freak, we always had, it would change, depending upon economic circumstances. And then he would just get bored eventually too. Like, I've seen everything HBO has. Well, get rid of that. Then he'd get Cinemax, or then he'd get Showtime, or then he'd get, the movie.
That was our household too. We would have HBO for a very short time. And this is when, late 80s, when you first had a VCR, you made sure you recorded everything that came on. And when you got rid of HBO, you rewatched those videotapes over and over.
Well, that's what I was about to say. I have a VHS tape thing here behind me. That's actually my dad's from back in the day. And one of the things I found when I was digging through some of his stuff was we didn't have very many left, but I found 3 or 4 tapes. And that's exactly what they are. That's how we had movies primarily is we would tape them either off of broadcast TV or we get HBO for a short time. And my dad was one of those guys that he'd tape everything. And for a while, what he would do is he would set the recorder at night. So we didn't even know what we were going to get. And sometimes we didn't even get the complete movie because the tape would run out.
Oh, he would just run it. He didn't even know
what was on. He didn't even know what was on.
Oh, hey, that's actually kind of a fun surprise.
Yeah, and then he would just run it unless we had a TV guy laying around. But he would just, hey, I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to set it to record. He'd set it on whatever LP or XLP or whatever they called it, and then the extended play, and then he'd set it they could record I think for like 8 hours or something. So he'd get 3 to 4 movies, and then he's like, okay, we've got what's that movie, Electric Glide and Blue or something like that, and Ghostbusters 2. And so we just have these tapes with just random movies. Like, okay, we've got Cocoon, The Return, and High Plains Drifter, and part of The Godfather. And that was the tape.
Right. Yeah, because that was so long you couldn't get it off the tape.
I swear that was, and so that's how I learned to watch movies, hence this show. But that's how I learned to watch movies, because when I was a kid and there was nothing to do, it's like, okay, let me just put in a tape. I just sit there and watch whatever the heck that tape was. And
there first time I got a VCR, I'm sure, I don't know if you remember this, but in the late 80s, buying a movie was very expensive.
Very expensive.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it was outrageous. Yes. So either you just had the movies you recorded off TV, or we had a handful of tapes that we bought from a video rental place that went out of business. So, I think I remember I had Ghostbusters, Return of the Jedi, couple other movies, and I must have watched those all the time. I mean, I could even put a number on how many times I've watched Ghostbusters, just because it was one of the very few tapes we had. So we were like, and it's good to watch anytime anyway. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what's interesting now is, you and I, slightly different eras, but we've lived through this transition period together now, like the streaming era. And we say, well, you have access to every movie. You don't really, but that's a separate issue. But you have access to quite an abundance. So not only are all these brand new, like you said, every 5 minutes are getting a brand new spectacle movie, to the point where there really aren't spectacle. It doesn't really feel like a spectacle anymore. It's just what movies are now. It's so ordinary.
Yes.
in 1996, we were blown away that they blew up the White House. Oh my God. Everyone has to go and see Independence Day because we've never seen.
Remember how hard it was to get into the theater that weekend?
Yes.
That was insane.
For like two shots. You know, they marketed it around like 2 shots.
Yeah.
And it was primarily around that White House blowing up. That was the whole marketing campaign.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
Now that's nothing. That is that's nothing, right? It's just, what is that?
Yep.
Like they do that on Netflix shows now. Like it's no big deal.
Yeah.
And so now it's funny because now not only do I have every new spectacle coming out every 5 minutes, I've got the entire history of spectacle in my pocket. And so then to carve out time and be like, so where does Jason and the Argonauts factor into that? You're right. It probably wouldn't even come up in the conversation unless you were a specific person who was at a certain age or a certain time when this was as fantastical and as giant as it got. And
yeah, absolutely.
You happen. My dad was one of those people, and you were probably the tail end of that.
More than likely, yes. And also, I'm on the tail end of the type of person that still likes stumbling across a movie on TV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not me anymore.
This is something I talked about with this is something that I talked about with Kevin. He said he didn't understand that. He goes, well, why would you want to do that? You know, you have everything access. I was like, I don't know. I just like surfing through channels and finding a movie I like and then sitting down and watching it. I mean, it's old fashioned. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
What's so weird though is I used to be that sort of person because that's what you had to be. If you liked TV, if you liked movies, you were a channel surfer. And I was a hardcore channel surfer, man. Even at the point when I not that long ago when I first got married, I was that guy. I was a channel surfer, and it would drive my now ex-wife insane. That did not contribute to the divorce. But it drove her insane. She was like, could you just pick something? I'd be like, nah, you know, because it's like, what else is on? What else is on? What else is on? And now I've gone so long without any cable like that. It's like, I'm not a channel surfer anymore. Now what I am is I go on my Fire Stick or the 50 million streaming services I have. Right. And I just scroll. Now it's not channel surfing. Now I'm like a title scrolling. Yeah. Constantly scrolling and you know. And what's weird about it now, though, is like to your point, when a little bit of the choice is taken away from you. Okay, you can choose to channel surf, but you don't get to choose what's on those channels. You will discover, and it's same thing was like in the old video store era or recording random movies off of HBO. You would discover stuff because you didn't have endless options. You're just like, well, I guess I'll watch this. And then so many times I'd be like, I don't know what this is. I guess I'll watch it. And I'd throw it on and be like, this is fantastic. Or at least it's very good. Or at least like, I know it's not good, but I like it. Like, you know, or it was.
And those are fun because that feels like you discovered something where you wouldn't have seeked it out otherwise. You wouldn't have gone out of your way to scroll through Netflix or Amazon or whatever and find it and watch it. But if you found it by accident or just like, I have this on as background noise and you end up getting sucked into it, that's always a fun experience.
I don't really have that anymore as much. And also on top of that, because we feel like we have endless access, it does feel like a little bit of like, if it doesn't really get me in the first 15 minutes, I can turn it off and I can go find something else.
Right.
And whereas,
oh man, that's my kids to a T. If it doesn't grab them usually, they moved on.
Yeah. And I'm not as bad as that, but I'm starting to kind of get there. The longer this streaming era goes on, I'm starting to be like, whatever, 20 minutes, whatever, it's no good. Turn it off, find something else. And it's like you couldn't do that. And so many times, you know, a movie that it just didn't really work for. It's almost like the way music used to work. I don't know. This is a total tangent, but you'd buy an album, and because you heard the single on the radio,
right? And then the rest of the album doesn't live up to it.
But then you keep because it's a brand new album, and you just spent $30 or $20 on it or $25 or whatever. Right. You just kept listening to it, and eventually, sometimes a song that was on the radio would end up being your least favorite, and you'd end up liking kind of the deeper cuts, or you'd end up loving the whole album, and you'd be like, oh wow, this whole thing's great, but it didn't catch you the first couple of times. And movies used to be like that. I was like, well, because you only had so many tapes or so many options. Well, I watched this, it didn't really work for me. I got nothing else to do. I'll just watch it again, and then maybe the second or third time it would click with you, and you'd be like, that movie's great. Now you have no reason to repeat watch anything if you don't want to. And I find myself revisiting newer movies less and less. I watch them once, maybe twice, and I never watch them again. And that's a different experience than we had in the past.
I would say that I have that more with TV shows, which is kind of hard to call them TV shows anymore because they stream. Say it's a show I really like. I'll watch it all the way through once. That's it. I don't need to go back and see it again. You know what I mean? The latest Marvel show on Disney Plus. Hey, that was great. I'm never going to watch it again. I'm never going to go back and watch it again.
That was so unheard of, right?
Right. Yeah. Before I would have rewatched it. No,
because what's so weird about that is now, in a sense, as long as we pay the subscriptions and the licenses are maintained, but especially like a Disney Plus property, that's going to be on there. Essentially, right, in our mind, forever, right? As long as that service exists. So for some reason, because of that actually takes away from your impulse to find it, because otherwise,
you know it's always there.
Yeah, because you know it's always there. Otherwise, it was like, I think about how many times, like, some of the Simpsons episodes are like ingrained in my brain, not just because I watched them when they originally aired, which I did, but because I would go eventually, sometimes years later, when they made their way to syndication, I'd watch 2 or 3 of them in an afternoon block every single day. And
yeah, me too. Same here.
And there's syndication doesn't really work that way anymore. And I don't have cable anymore. And I just don't consume things like that. So nothing really attaches itself to me. Nothing becomes ingrained in me the way that it did. Some of that's age, but some of that's also repetition. And so I can totally see, this is a long way of getting around to it, but I could totally see, and if you're watching Jason the Argonauts, one, it's going to stand out heads and tails over everything else that's on TV.
Yeah. 2,
it could grab the imagination of a young person at your age. 3, it's not that much different from, it's not that far afield from Star Wars, by comparison.
Right. It's a hero's journey, just like anything else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
And if it's played on TV all the time, you probably saw pieces of it at the very least repeatedly. So those things become ingrained in you in a way that other stuff doesn't. I'm coming at it from a guy who's like, I've seen a couple of these once 25 years ago. So it's just a different experience. So they're not a part of the fabric of my film fandom as they are yours.
Absolutely. I could totally see that. And again, this seems foreign to someone older, or younger, I mean. When you had to stumble across it on TV, you really paid attention to it because this is it. You're going to see it now, and you don't know when they're going to replay this again. So now's the point. Same with, you can say that about any kind of specials they showed. If they showed Charlie Brown Christmas, you knew if you didn't watch it that night, you weren't going to see it again for a whole nother year. Whereas now it's at your fingertips. You can watch these things anytime.
So you were also with less distractions around you and also focusing more, because that might be the only time in your life you might see it.
Yeah.
By focusing that much more, it probably became a deeper part of you even after the first time you watched it. You were just absorbing it on a deeper level.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you find yourself with new stuff absorbing it as deeply as you would have Jason and the Argonauts?
No, because there's just so much of it. It's just an onslaught now. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to once in a while something really stands out. But you know what's really weird? Sometimes I'll see a movie that I'm like, oh my gosh, that was so incredible. I've never seen anything like it. And then I don't have any interest in seeing it again.
Right.
Does that make any sense?
That's what I'm saying. What I mean?
This happens all the time.
Yeah.
This happens all the time. I'm like, I'll tell somebody, that was the greatest movie I saw last year. And then I'll be flipping channels beyond. I'm like, I can't watch this. Right.
That's exactly it. That is, I know
I told everybody this was the greatest movie ever, but I can't be watching.
I can't be bothered to watch it because there's 50 billion other things I got to get to. I got to finish that show. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got this thing on my phone. I'm on Twitter. And it's just like, what do you think that says?
But I'll rewatch the same Simpsons or Seinfeld episodes over and over.
But those, those are ingrained in us though, because they come from a different era.
Yeah,
so those are almost like vestigial limbs from a previous. It's like our viewing habits have evolved, and we have these vestigial habits that hold on from the past. But I can't even completely say that because during the pandemic, everybody made a big deal of, and even before it, everybody made a big deal of the fact that so many people were rewatching Friends. And one of the big deals that was made about it was like Gen Zers and Zoomers who weren't even born or were just being born when the show was ending and going off the air were like obsessed with the show.
Yeah, my kids were that way. They watch Friends all the time. Well, for one, it's always on. You know what I mean? If there's one show that you can guarantee is on any given time of day, it's Friends. So yeah, I mean,
so that's
you can flip on TV, it's going to be playing.
That's so what that's I guess
in the office too. My kids are really getting into the
Friends
office.
in the office, right? Yeah. So those are like the last two of the old school way that we consume media, and it's somehow, for whatever reason, it's hooked younger generations. But we've all of us have just gotten past that point. We just don't consume things in that way. So
that's correct.
Yeah. So remind me again, what was the score you gave Jason Argonauts, and where did it rank for you?
Oh, it was number 1 on my list, and I gave it a 9.
Yeah, that's right.
Is I know you're going to think it sounds really high. That sounds like what you would give like The Godfather, or something like that. But it just was a very important movie for me growing up.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
I mean? So
it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
All right. Well, our last film in this conversation about Ray Harryhausen is Clash of the Titans, which came out in 1981 and has a 65% on Rotten Tomatoes.
The danger, the daring, the challenge, the courage. Clash of the Titans. The risks, the rewards, the terror, the triumph. Clash of the Titans. The odyssey of the warrior Perseus. Through wonders no man has seen and horrors no man has faced. MGM presents Clash of the Titans. Rated PG.
Starts Friday at the Century 25 Man's Birdcage Walk, Sacramento Drive-In, Stockton Royal.
It was directed by Desmond Davis. It was written by Beverly Cross. It is the triumphant return of Sir Laurence Olivier, last seen in Spartacus. It's a triumphant return of Maggie Smith, last seen in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. It's a triumphant return of Burgess Meredith, last seen in Rocky V. This film was released June 12, 1981, on a budget of between $9 million and $15 million. Made $70 million worldwide. This thing was a giant hit.
You know what's really interesting? I looked up on just to see how much it made.
Yeah.
I went on Box Office Mojo. It's not listed on the list of top movies of, was it 81? Yeah. It's not on the list at all. I think somebody made an error and just forgot to put it in there, because it would be in at that what the amount you just said. It would be in the top 10.
It would have to have, because this was a big movie.
Yeah, it would be. This would be like the 5th or at maybe most 4th highest grossing movie.
Well, you were around in 81. Wasn't this a big hit?
I saw this is of all Harryhausen movies, this is the only one I saw in the theater. Yeah. This was a big deal.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So I think there's, I don't know. I don't know where they, there's discrepancies.
Well, granted, and I think of the other big movies that year. I think the biggest one, in my mind, was Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Had to be.
I mean, everybody was talking about that. Yeah. Everybody. And Superman 2, I think, was the other big one, at least for kids my age. Sense. You know. But Clash of the Titans was way up there. They had toys that went with it. It was a fun movie. Like I said, it's one, today a kid today watching it today would probably turn their nose up at it. I enjoy it. It's not great, but I still like it. I don't know. I'm curious to hear what your thought on it.
Well, my synopsis of the film is: the son of Zeus must go on a quest to save his true love and fulfill his destiny. All of these movies have the exact same plot.
Yeah.
Okay, first and foremost, Bebo is R2-D2.
Yeah, that exactly. At that time, they said, "Hey, we need to have R2-D2 is super popular. We need an R2-D2. Hey, this is ancient Greece. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't matter. Get a bleeping blooping robot in there. We don't care. We don't care. What
it doesn't matter.
That in there.
Get a bleeping blooping robot in this bleeping blooping movie, and they did. And they called it Bebo, and he is R2-D2. I will say this: Vita Taylor is a mortal worth leaving Mount Olympus for. That is his Perseus's mom. And if I were Zeus, I wouldn't blame him at all. I'm leaving Mount Olympus. I'm falling in love with her. I'm making sweet, sweet intercourse with her, and I'm producing a bastard son of a god. Laurence Olivier, the reviews at the time were like, Laurence Olivier is terrible in this movie. Even he cannot elevate the film, because this movie did not get good reviews. No. I, on the other hand, having sat through what felt like 50 different iterations of this exact same story, felt that Laurence Olivier, yes, he's hamming it up. Yes, he's chewing the scenery. But this is a junk movie. I think he knows it's a junk movie. And I think he brings some level of gravitas. He's speaking as if he were Zeus, as if he were a god. And to me, his performance worked. And
yeah, he doesn't feel like he's phoning it in.
No.
You know what I mean?
No.
I know, hey, you got to wear this toga. We're going to put this light show behind your head.
I thought that was cool, honestly.
Yeah, I thought, hey, that was a cool effect. Yeah. It still is cool. Yeah. I think it still looks neat. At no point did I ever feel like he was like, oh my God, just give me my paycheck and let me get out
of
here.
And none of the Pantheon. I thought Maggie Smith is really good in this. I think Burgess Meredith is good in this. I'm just a big Burgess Meredith fan. I love him in anything.
Me too.
I just love the way he speaks. And he's got such an ability. You can give him some of the worst dialogue that's ever been written, and Burgess Meredith will find a way of saying that dialogue in a way that seems credible. And he does that here. I think by this point, by 81, we're definitely at the end of the road as far as practical effects, optical effects. They've surpassed Harryhausen.
Yes, this is true. This is true. Even though they're still using stop motion at this era, they're now being used a little bit more sparingly. It's not hanging all on that.
Yes.
And somebody can correct me if I'm wrong here, but there was another movie came out around this time. It's called Dragon Slayer.
Yeah, yep, Dragon Slayer.
And they did a stop motion. If I remember right, they did stop motion dragon, obviously, on that, but they did something that they never had before, where they somehow put a little blur to the wing motion, so it wasn't so animated looking. You know what I mean?
Yeah, is that what they called? Is that go motion? Is that what they call it?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And again, I think this is off the top of my head, and I could be remembering the completely wrong thing, and somebody's probably like, well, that idiot didn't know what he's talking about. It's this and that. But I seem to recall it being that particular movie. I could be wrong. But you're right. This was the last hurrah for Harryhausen. And boy, he really went out. I mean, he went all out on this. He was like, this probably, of all these movies, this might have the most creatures in it. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I may have to go back and count, but he's got a lot in here. A lot.
So walk me through this. You see this in 1981. What's the experience like? How excited were you? What were your thoughts when you saw it for the first time? When did you eventually see it again? How long did you have to wait until it came out on home video or TV or cable? Walk me through the whole thing. Tell me your story.
I saw it. I saw it in the theater. It was great. And again, much like the Sinbad movie, they don't make you wait. They show the Kraken early on. Yeah. Now they don't give you a good full reveal on it, but you still get the idea of there's a giant monster.
Yeah.
And then, and again, much like yourself, when I was a kid, I was big into Greek mythology. I knew the story. They stick to it pretty good. You know what I mean? They take a few liberties, but more or less, this is a story of Perseus as it plays out with Andromeda. It was it was really great. Everybody, there's always something that everybody loved or took away from this that they liked. You know, somebody liked, I thought the Kraken looked really cool, but I remember I had a figure of the ferryman, the skeleton.
Yes, from the River Styx.
Yeah. River Styx. Yeah, I had the action figure of that guy. I mean, it just looked.
That
cool.
was really cool. I mean? That still looks really cool.
Yeah, sure does.
When you walked out of the theater, other than the River Styx guy death, when you walked out of the theater, what was the big thing that left an impression on you? Were like, that was the cool special effect.
I think the Kraken looked really cool.
Yeah.
Like I said, he he went all out on this. There's a lot of stuff in here. You had, the scorpions look cool. I guess the only thing that to me is I think wasn't there a giant vulture or something that I don't remember.
Yeah, there's some birds or something. Yes.
Was this the one with? This is the one with. I'm maybe blending these. This had the harpies, right? Where they had to capture the harpies.
Now I'm blending them. Is the harpies this or Jason the Argonauts?
No. That's why I'm.
They start to blur together.
That is blurring together. I was thinking,
Heather, when do the harpies? Heather, we need you. When do the harpies show up? You know. Leave a comment up below on this episode.
Yeah. Oh no. Actually, what was a really big hit was Medusa.
To me, when I think about this movie and because again, this movie is showing on TV as I'm growing up. I'm not much younger than this movie. So this was the one that was around all the time. It was played on HBO and ad nauseum, I felt like.
Oh, definitely.
And so I've seen bits and pieces of this forever and ever. I've seen all the way through. It's been a while since I've seen all the way through. I've seen bits and pieces of this. Like, it seems like my entire life, basically. And, but also just in the zeitgeist, man, like in the culture, like when I heard Ray Harryhausen, the first image that pops in my head is Medusa.
Yes. Yeah.
And the second image that pops in my head is the skeletons.
Yeah. Skeletons is always number one for me, but I can see Medusa.
Yeah. Those are the two things that's what I think of. I think of the skeletons. And anytime I've ever seen a skeleton effect, like in Army of Darkness or anything like that, I'm like, Harryhausen. Harryhausen.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Even in Terminator, like I said, I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, that's Ray Harryhausen. It just becomes synonymous with him. But also, first and foremost, it's Medusa. It's this movie for whatever reason. And I'm not going to lie and say, oh, the Medusa still holds up. No, it doesn't. It doesn't hold up. It's very obviously clay. But the sequence is really cool.
Yes.
And with the shield and him using the shield and tricking her with his own reflection and then, cutting her head off and the way it all plays out. And then her with the bow and arrow and just taking out all of his guys. It plays out very, very, very well. The scale of everything is perfected. And I guess the bottom line is when I look at this movie and I think about it, I think this guy over the 40 years of his career has taken this just about as far as you possibly could. Because when you think of the Tippets, and that's really basically it. When you think of him, Tippett, he doesn't get much further than this.
Right.
It doesn't get much better than this. Even when you look like Empire and the Tauntaun and stuff like that, it's not much better than this, really.
Right.
And I know it's only a couple years after this, but that's like 83, right? So I know it's not, they're basically contemporaries, but even the RoboCop, which is closer to the end of the 80s, the Ed 209's not much better than what's in this movie.
Well, and also I think the Ed 209 and to another extent the AT-ATs from Star Wars, that's a little bit more forgiving because that's a machine.
Yes.
So if it's herky jerky, it's because the machine is herky jerky.
Yeah. Well, if
the living creature's herky jerky, it looks weird.
Well, the RoboCop, when what's his face goes out the window.
Oh yeah, with the giant arms.
Weird. Looks terrible.
Yeah,
and it's like that looks like something that Harryhausen did in the 60s. That looks like something from Sinbad. Yeah, that's awful.
I never understood that. Even in the 80s, they should have done better than that.
That effect has never looked good.
It's distracting as hell too.
So it's interesting to look at this movie because now we're post Star Wars. Now we're post Jaws. Yep. This is a contemporary, so to speak. They want this to be a blockbuster. And what it really is like we've talked about, there's like this ebb and flow in history where the sword and sorcery, sword and sandal movies were real popular. We already talked about that era with Jason Argonauts and Sinbad. Then they died. Yep. They died out. But then with high fantasy, high concept movies become all the rage again post Star Wars because everybody's like, we need our own Star Wars, right? And if they don't set it in space, so then we get the Conans and we get this and we get all the whole Excalibur and even Red Sonja. We get and we get tons of low rent straight to video ones of like
Oh yeah,
Deathstalker and Beastmaster and all this sort of stuff. So this is like right there in that wave. And of course, who are you going to get? You're going to get the guy from all of those movies, and they got him kind of now in the towards the end of his career. And it's impressive, but it does feel a little bygone. It does feel like it's like 1980. It's a weird. Now you're almost in this uncanny valley because the movie, like the human characters, I mean, it looks old now, but it still looks more contemporary.
Yeah.
But it looks like special effects from the 60s set in a movie made in the late 70s or early 80s.
Yeah.
And those two aesthetics don't blend.
Yeah, and you have a couple characters where, a close-up, it's a person in makeup. From a distance, it both basically Calabos and Medusa.
Yes.
If it's close up, it's a person in makeup. If once you pull away, it's a model, and you really see the difference between the
Yeah, the Calabos stuff, just that to me worked way less than the Medusa stuff. Because they have him just like walking around rubble and scenery and stuff, and
if he didn't have a tail, he could have just been a guy in makeup the whole time.
That's what I didn't understand. Why not just have him be a guy in makeup?
Yeah.
Every time
he didn't have to be a model.
Every time they cut wide, it's so obvious. It's just this clay, Gumby figure walking around. It takes you out of the movie.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
but I gotta tell you what, like going back to the Medusa thing, that was really unique. I mean, that was the first time they said, "Hey, you know what? It's not really perceived this way in mythology, but let's make her part rattlesnake." You know what I mean? What a crazy thing to do. You know what I mean? And now it seems like every time you see Medusa in a movie, that's exactly what they do.
Well, I think they got that Amazon commercial with Medusa, and she's a rattlesnake.
I was going to say that. The Amazon commercial, same thing. Yeah. Got a snake body. I mean, you could thank Harryhausen for that, I guess.
Wow. Yeah, what when we think about him, what's likely true is he probably made no money.
Yeah.
Because he was a technical guy, and even back, it didn't really matter. Most people that made movies, that played sports, whatever, didn't make a lot of money, even in their time, unless you were like a star or a producer or a head of a studio. A lot of the folks that worked in the sort of the old days of Hollywood, they didn't make a lot. They were craftsmen. They didn't make a lot of money.
Yep.
And it's still true this day for a lot of people behind the scenes. They don't make a ton of money. We don't think of it like that, but it's true.
Well, especially the people that do the CGI work. There was a documentary. I don't know if you saw that one. It was a documentary about the people that did the CGI work on Life of Pi. How that movie bankrupted them.
I remember that.
And then they won the Oscar for best special effects after they had already closed up shop.
Wow.
Because they had to eat the cost on whenever they decide to redo a scene.
Wow. Yeah.
It was really interesting. It made you feel bad for these people. They talk about they work these 80, 90-hour weeks and for nothing.
And that's the thing. It's like, okay, Ray Harryhausen in a garage somewhere, the camera doing just like the slightest, tiniest manipulations, frame by frame. And then here I am, this punk, born in a different decade, just toss it off and be like, blah, it sucks. I don't feel like I really said that, but
it is what it is. I mean, you're used to a certain level of, that's what you're used to. So.
We're so time bound, I think, is the moral of the story here. And I like this movie. I did not like this movie as much as Jason the Argonaut. So therefore it is my number 3. And I'm going to give it a 6.75 out of 10. Harry Hamlin stinks. And he is never been good. He is the wrong Perseus. And again, it's like the Sinbad thing again, where it's like, there are bits and pieces of this that, again, the Pantheon here is great. There's bits and pieces here of the story and everything else that's like interesting. And yet in the middle of it, we have this absolutely bland male lead. And I don't understand. He's obviously was like a handsome guy, but other than that, it's like,
I had never seen him in anything before this. This must have been his big?
I think it was. It had to have been
coming out party, and then after this, then he was on L.A. Law.
He was TV mostly, right?
Yeah.
I remember him mostly from TV, and I obviously knew it was him in this, but.
Now, here's something I didn't realize until I was looking up information on this earlier. Apparently, they wanted Schwarzenegger for the lead, but there was so much dialogue, it wouldn't work. You know what I mean? They're like,
he had done Hercules in New York at this point.
Right. Well, in that they dubbed over.
But they dubbed over. Right, exactly.
But I think by the time this came out,
isn't Conan out?
Been out? Yeah, Conan was out, but he didn't really speak a lot in the movie. You know what I mean? And when he did, it made sense for a barbarian to talk like that. So I think this one had a lot, of dialogue that I guess it wouldn't work with him in there. And again, this is what I'm just reading on online. So
yeah,
how much truth is behind it, or how much of his legend, I don't know.
Yeah. So when you get out of the theater, did you still only see it once in theaters, or was this a repeat viewing for you?
I don't remember. If I saw it again. My dad was spendthrifty, I guess. So if I saw it again, it was probably at a dollar show, which those things I don't think exist anymore. But yeah, if I saw it again, it was probably more like at a dollar show.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So
did you end up owning this or recording this off of TV?
I recorded it off TV. Yeah. When it, like you said, when it ran on HBO, it ran a lot, and I had this recorded on some blank tape somewhere, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
and
then of course just watching when it came on.
Is this in your collection now? Do you have this in Blu-ray or?
I had this on DVD a long time ago, and then one time I was doing a purge, and I was like, I'm probably never going to watch this again, and I got rid of it. You know what I mean? I think I got rid of it. Yeah. Well, but now it's on. I think I rewatched it. The other week it's on HBO Max.
Yes. It's on HBO Max.
Yeah. Oh. And
which is hilarious, right? Because they played it to death on HBO, and now it's just on HBO Max.
Right.
They must have a piece of it or something.
You said about the thing you said about Jason and the Argonauts feeling like it ran on too long. I kind of felt that when I was rewatching this.
Yes, it does.
I was just kind of like, oh my god, is it really? Is this still going? They still haven't gotten to the witches yet. They haven't gotten to this yet.
Oh, it takes forever to get to those witches.
Yeah. I understand it's an Odyssey, but it really feels like an Odyssey.
You're right. They get to the creatures quick, but that's the weird thing. Okay, that's what knocked this movie down a few pegs for me. Because we're immediately in high fantasy, but for the actual human story, the quest, Perseus going on this quest, it takes forever to get there. Yep. It takes forever for, it's just for him to even meet Burgess Meredith. That takes forever. Yeah. And then they hang around in that place for a while. And then they go back to this other place. And then, I know you're right. I know what they're going for. They want you to make it feel like this huge epic. And I was thinking about this as watching this movie in particular. I was like, okay, you're going to kill me, Matt, here. But I've never been the world's biggest Lord of the Rings movies fan. Okay.
Oh, okay. No, I can see that.
My favorite of the three was, ironically, the one that I liked the most was the Two Towers.
Okay,
which
sure.
I think that makes me an anomaly, but I haven't revisited them in a long.
No,
I haven't.
It's a good movie. It's solid.
I haven't revisited them in a long time, so I don't. I saw them on theaters, and I own them all, but I haven't watched them in a long, long time, so I might have to revisit them at some point. But what this movie did, and what all of these movies really did, but what this movie in particular did, is it made me appreciate those movies so much more. Because 20 years later. Yeah. I've seen a lot of bad fantasy movies. I've seen Crawl.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of bad fantasy movies.
I was just watching Crawl last night.
Not good.
What was the end of it? I was flipping channels. I was like, it was literally like 1:30 in the morning. And I was like, Crawl's on. I was like, and then I think I fell asleep before it even ended.
Oh, I'm sure you did.
But that is bad.
Yeah, it's very bad. And this is better than Crawl for sure. But.
Oh yeah, hands down. Are you kidding me?
But even this is not that good. And I was like, as I was watching this, I'm like, okay, all of these stories are interesting. And you take Harryhausen, you move him aside. If you could just get these characters and these stories right, and it was just I had in my notes like, has no one made a good epic fantasy? And then it clicked. It was like, oh no, the Lord of the Rings movies. And what you realize is what an achievement
Yeah,
Peter Jackson was able to pull off. Not with the Hobbit films, but with it.
No, I didn't care for the Hobbit
but
films.
with that Lord of the Rings trilogy should not have worked, and it did, and it changed the game, and it was so. And then also, as we're recording this, not that long ago, a movie called The Northman came out.
Yeah, I watched it. We just saw that just the other night. Very good.
And I was like, because I was like, what these movies did is they whet my appetite for an epic historical fantasy whatever film. Like, man, the stuff is here. There's gotta be somebody who's made a good one. And I've never seen Excalibur. It's been on my watch list for a long time.
Oh, that's a very good
It's
movie.
like 4
Very
hours
good movie.
long, so I have not gotten to it yet.
Well, is it though? I don't remember it being
It's
that
3
long.
hours, close to 3 hours.
Is it? Okay, yeah.
It's on my list though.
I'm a big fan.
And I'm trying to figure out a way to work it into a future episode of the show. But because then I have to watch it. But then we realized, like, no, man, it's the Lord of the Rings and the Northmen. But they're few and far between, and the vast majority of them are of this tier or much, 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 much lower. So,
oh yeah, definitely,
so this is the
definitely.
middle of the road for me, because after a certain point, it just, again, it felt like it took forever to get going on the quest, and then it felt like we're still like the last half hour, we're still going. And this was one of the longer ones. This one is,
it feels every minute of the length.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, it really does. Now, did you see the remake of this?
I did, and I've reviewed it on this show, and it is a terrible film.
Yeah, it's not good. Now, even worse is the sequel to it. That's so bad it makes the other one actually look decent.
Yes, that's correct.
I've never understood how Sam Worthington became a movie star. I've never in my life can figure out how that guy was headlining movies, big blockbuster one after the next.
One flop.
He's like a piece of wood. Well, but I mean, like Avatar, huge movie. There he is.
That's right.
You know,
Terminator Salvation.
He's in this. That was a terrible.
Yep. So, what is this? What's your score for this? Where does it rank for you?
This ranked. I gotta go back to my notes. I know it ranked number 2 on my list. I had it about 6.97 maybe. And again, the more I talk about it now, especially talking about the pacing and stuff, I'm wondering if I shouldn't lower this. You know what I mean? It's hard because again, you know, I was, you know, 9 years old when this came out, in 9 or 10, and it's very exciting. You're like, wow, look at this. It's very cool. But, you know, as an adult, when I tried watching it on HBO Max the other week, it was like, this is a little bit of a slog. I do like that. The one thing I like the best about it is they let him go out. You know, they said, you know, if this is Harryhausen's last movie, let him go nuts. You know what I mean? And they really let him go nuts. So I really do like the like I said, Medusa looks great, Kraken looks great. You know, a lot of good stuff in there. But, you know, Harry Hamlin, not so great. But I don't know. You know, it's funny. The more we talk about this, the more I'm reevaluating my list. But, you know, and now I'm like, God, why did I put Mighty Joe Young so low when it's hard for me to defend these other ones? But, you know, I'm going to stick with it.
Speaking of so low, it's time for a recap. Coming number 5 for me is The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. I give that a, what did I say here? What did I say? 4 out of 10, something like that. I think. Number 4 is It Came From Beneath the Sea, which I gave a 5 out of 10. Number 3 is Clash of the Titans, which I gave a 6.75 out of 10. Number 2 is my namesake, Jason the Argonauts, 7 out of 10. And number 1 is Mighty Joe Young with a 7.5 out of 10. What is your recap?
Okay. My lowest of the low is It Came From Beneath the Sea. That's I'm giving that one a generous 5.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Again, I almost hate to say this. Mighty Joe Young, I have number 4. And I had that at a 6.8. I had, this is going to sound weird saying it now. I had Sinbad at 3 and at a 6.9. But again, this is based off me liking the creatures.
Yeah.
This is not basing it. This is an unfair judgment. I'm not judging on the movie itself, or in that case, Mighty Joe Young would leapfrog over quite a few of these. Clash of the Titans, I had number 2 at just around a solid 7. And then Jason the Argonauts, I had, I have it scribbled here. I can't tell if it's a 9 or an 8, but I'll just go ahead and say I'll go ahead and say 9. You know what? The heck with it.
No,
I
really
really like
a
Jason
9. It was a 9 because
I'm sticking with my guns. It's a 9.
Yeah,
you know
I choked on my water when you said it the first time.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh, he's crazy. 9. What is this?
If you could only recommend one movie off of this list, what's your recommendation?
Oh, Jason and Argonauts. It's. I don't even have to think twice about that.
If you had to guess what my recommendation is,
if I just tell somebody to watch one Harryhausen movie, that's it.
If you had to guess what my recommendation is, what would you guess?
Mighty Joe Young, just based on. And granted, of all these, that's probably the best story, I guess, just because it's the humans are interesting more than the others. But I do find the humans interesting in Jason. You know what I mean? It's they're not that memorable. I couldn't even tell you the name of the actors off the top of my head. That's for certain. You put a gun in my head. And I was like, one of my favorite movies of all time. Who played Jason? I'm like, I don't know.
No clue. But that goes back to how this entire thing kicked off. When we talked about these movies, we said, you don't think about the actors. You don't think about the directors. You don't think about you won't even know who they are. You will, but you know that because of Ray Harryhausen. So,
yes, absolutely.
I want you to bring us home here, and I want you to if somebody is listening to this and they've never seen a Ray Harryhausen movie, we've just gone on about him for a couple hours, and they've stuck with us this long. What do you want their takeaway to be about Ray Harryhausen? I think we tried to construct, as we talked about the movie, a narrative to do him justice. But I put a button on it. If you had to summarize,
I would say,
who is Ray Harryhausen? Why does he matter? Not just to you, but to movies in general.
I think just an appreciation of the craft that he brought. I mean, that is a very time-consuming process, and it's a lot harder to get off a special effect of shooting a thing one frame at a time than have somebody in a phony rubber suit running around, and that's your monster. You know what I mean? And I'm going to tell you right now, there were some really bad, fantasy sci-fi movies in the 70s where they would take like they buy a lizard from the store and tape a big fin to the back and say that was a dinosaur. You know what I mean? So, it's, I think just appreciation of the design, the craft, the artistry that goes with what he brought to movies. And I think it spills over into, like you said, into the 80s, even up to now. You can see appreciation of what he's done with some filmmakers today.
Absolutely. Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. If our folks want to find you, where are you at on the internet, man? Get your plug-in. What are you doing when you're not on Real Spoilers? What do you do?
I like posting my illustrations on Instagram. I've Matt Reedy 219 is my handle, so that's where I post most of my new stuff. So,
and you are again a graphic designer. Do design work?
Yeah. Dude, art director for Purina, and then I do a lot of illustration and stuff on the side.
Are you open for commissions?
Always.
Okay, so you got to put that out there, man. You got to show yourself.
That reminds me, I actually have a commission I got to work on tonight. So,
well, I won't hold you up. You got money to be made. I hope
that's right.
Hope that I have given Heather her money's worth. Heather,
I hope so too. I hope she's not cursing right now. Like, why did you have this guy on here when you could have had me?
Yeah, Heather, Matt gave it his A game, and if you think it stunk, it's not our fault. It's Kevin's fault. So that's
I can't wait to hear Heather's take on these. I'd like to hear her ranking.
That's it, Heather, and everybody else listening. Yeah. If you have watched these Harryhausen films, or maybe you've decided after this episode you want to dive into some of these because what else you got to do in your life? Let us know what your rankings are. Like, first of all, tell us, what have you seen? What have you haven't seen? Tell us, do you know who Ray Harryhausen is, children? Do you know? And if you do, what are your thoughts about him? And what's the first creature that comes to your mind when you think about Ray Harryhausen? And then how would you rank these movies? So are you on Twitter, Matt?
I'm on Twitter. I've set up Twitter like 6 years ago, and I've never used it. So
don't.
I think it's the same. I think it's also Matt Reedy 219 on Twitter. But
don't tag.
I couldn't tell you the last time.
Don't tag Matt on Twitter, but you can tag us at Binge Movies. Yeah. If you're listening to this and you want to sponsor an episode for some far-flung thing in film that you're interested in, go to bingemovies.podbean.com, hit sponsor an episode. You will find all the links you need there. If you want to become a monthly supporter, you get access to exclusive shows that are only on Patreon that are completely different from what we do elsewhere. And live streams, watch-alongs, bonus content, written reviews, so much more, and voting power. We have so many different benefits. Head over to patreon.com/binge movies. We've got 3 tiers left remaining. Find the tier that works best for you. And they all come with different levels of bonus access and bonus features and special stuff. So we would greatly appreciate it. Our patrons help this show keep going. And if you don't have any extra money, I completely understand. You don't want to sponsor an episode, I completely understand. Here's something you can do for us to support us absolutely free. Go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts. On both those platforms, you can leave us a 5-star review. If you want to write something, that really helps too. Tell us why you like Binge Movies. And if you can't come up with the time to write a review, then at least give us that 5 stars. Makes a difference. So many people have found this show because either somebody shared it on social media or because of a written review, and it bumped us up in the old algorithm. So feed the algorithm.
Yes, very important. That's very important. And always give 5 stars. Don't ever give 4 stars to things. That's the worst. Give 5 stars or nothing.
This guy's not even, you don't even have a podcast, do you, Matt?
No, but I get that the same algorithm on my Etsy site. So
bingo. I
know that shares and everything. Yeah, it all comes down to that.
Yeah. So. Thank you so much, Matt, for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jason. I hope I didn't go on too long.
That's great. I really enjoyed our conversation. And find Matt's illustrations, get him a commission, give him some money. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Go to his Instagram and say thanks for being on Binge Movies. Give him a follow if you're over on that social media platform, Matt. Really appreciate it. I'm going to let you get to your work that actually pays you something. So until next time, everybody, binge on.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jason. I really appreciate it.